Bro is the strongest general in the human army, yet at the same time he's also the demon's strongest general. Bro is a triple agent, because even I don't know where his true loyalty lies, since he's pulling some Megamind level 4D chess moves, manipulating every side of the war, while suffering from a mental disorder that makes him switch from innocent first season Naruto to first page guts, tearing demons and humans apart, all while laughing at their agony, despite having the sweetest, smoothest baby face, since this curvy red-haired demon girl and her pink-haired friend are both into him as a demon general. While back in the human kingdom, the psychotic Yandere princess is also doing everything she can to get with him while he's out there handing out backstabs for free to every enemy in sight. So yeah, this boy is so terrifying and brutal that everyone's greatest fear is having him as an enemy. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Like any fantasy world, we have demons and warriors fighting for the empire. Among the demons stands their king, the undisputed ruler of them all. The warriors are supported by the empire for the sole purpose of defeating him, while the demon king exists solely to stop the warriors. Explosions erupt everywhere, and one warrior shouts that he's attacking from behind. But of course, the demon king also has followers who serve him with absolute loyalty. A pink-haired girl appears, lands a kick, and says she'll handle the weaker ones. The warriors immediately recognize them as the commanders. You can already see the fierce redhead on the right, and there are 12 of them in total, all led by the Demon King's most powerful ally. They charge forward, and the blue-haired man swings his sword, cutting through the warriors. The story explains that some warriors were considered invincible, but one so-called invincible warrior met his end at the hands of the Zeroth Corps commander, known as Demon Arut. He was the king's hidden trump card and most treasured asset. Then out of nowhere, a resignation letter lands on the table, and the king demands to know what's going on. The white-haired boy immediately says he's leaving. The king's pen shatters as he demands an explanation. Papers fly everywhere, striking the boy in the face, as the king asks how he dares turn his back on him. Suddenly the king drops to his knees, clings to his leg, and begs him not to leave. He says the boy can't abandon him and asks why he's doing this. The boy doesn't seem eager to talk, but the king demands a reason. Does he dislike the castle? Did someone insult or mistreat him? Was he discriminated against for being human? The king says he cannot accept that. Even though Arut is human, he's the most powerful person the king has. His power surpasses everyone else's so completely that they can only envy him. He is the king's strongest card, someone no one dares challenge. Dion says no one did anything wrong, so the king presses him for the real reason. If he refuses to explain, Dion interrupts and asks whether the king plans to kill him. The king recoils in shock and says he never would. He has many subordinates, but he would never kill the boy. He shakes him and asks whether this is because he hasn't been sent to the battlefield. Dion is about to respond. Blood suddenly drips onto the floor. His nose is bleeding. The king immediately panics and calls for the doctors. Sometime later they examine his body. A girl applies healing magic, while the king demands to know his condition. A doctor named Ben says everyone knows the battles have taken a toll on him and his body can no longer endure them. But the king cuts him off, saying he didn't summon him just to hear what he already knows. They must find a way to heal him quickly, or they know what will happen if they fail. Ben says he understands, and the Demon King orders the boy to return to his room and focus on recovering. So they take Dion by the arm and carry him back through the kingdom, placing him on a stretcher as the people around them whisper. Some say the general is close to death, while others claim he once blocked a hero's explosion, and may even be as powerful as the king himself. Everyone considers his presence a blessing, while the protagonist only thinks he's doomed. All he wants is a peaceful retirement, yet people keep inventing new stories about him. They believe he killed a hero and possesses incredible power. To him, though, the whole thing feels like a joke. The doctors bow, tell him to rest, and leave. Meanwhile, Demon Arut, also known as the Dying Heart, keeps thinking that he isn't nearly as gifted as everyone believes. The girl comes to collect his medicine cup, and he places it on the tray, but she stumbles slightly, so he tells her she may leave. She walks away giddily, thrilled that his hand touched hers. He assumes she must despise him and felt disgusted after touching a human's hand. The only person he is certain strangely cares about him is the Demon King, who constantly orders others to bring him food and look after him. But even the king goes too far sometimes. He's a human in the demon realm, born with a frail body that could collapse under the slightest stress. Yet after a chain of incidents, everyone believes he's the strongest. He even became commander of the demon's strongest corps. Fortunately, his health has worsened lately, giving him an excuse to avoid fighting. But he knows that once they discover how fragile he is, they'll tear him apart. He rises in alarm, realizing he can't remain in this castle much longer. None of these demons have hearts. He needs to find somewhere safe and peaceful to live. Just then, someone named Ed enters the room and calls out to him. The protagonist asks whether he just returned from the human realm, and Ed says he did, adding that he brought him a reflection mirror to play with. Ed is one of the few demons he feels comfortable around and always brings him little gifts from the human world. But Ed is worried. He heard Dion collapsed and asks what he needs to recover. The protagonist thinks this is yet another misunderstanding and blames himself for everything. Ed, however, disagrees. He says all the demons survived because Dion faced that hero, though Dion insists that isn't true. I just want to know what kind of misunderstanding happened here, or whether he's pretending and really did everything despite denying it. Then Ed says he'll torture every human until he finds a treatment. That's when the protagonist remembers that in the end, they're still demons. His friend tells him to rest and waves goodbye, leaving Dion to think that Ed is at least the only person who genuinely cares about him. The king also seems to care, since he always tries to keep him safe. Dion only hopes the king doesn't misunderstand the situation and do something foolish. Back in the throne room, the king stares at the boy's resignation letter, wondering what he was thinking. His expression is impossible to read because he never shows one. Still, there's no denying he has been like this since the moment they met. The king recalls first seeing him after he defeated that hero. The demons claimed he had killed a human to stop his self-destruction. The king saw him as an intriguing gift from the empire and asked his name. He was amazed by the boy's loyalty in throwing himself into battle and couldn't understand why the empire had sent him somewhere so dangerous. After learning his name, the king decided that if he gained such a powerful ally, he would never waste him on a meaningless death, so he offered him a position in the army. The king knows he has protected the boy well, but he also can't keep assigning him only dangerous missions. At that moment, he glances at one of the papers and seems to get an idea. He immediately orders every commander to attend an important meeting, thinking it will make the boy happy. Meanwhile, the boy trembles in bed. Suddenly, he storms out of the room in fury. The Demon King summoned him just as he was resting. The bastard who put him in that room is now springing this on him. Worst of all, it's a commander's meeting, meaning every powerhouse in the castle will be there, making things even worse. It's practically the same as walking into a death trap. He knows he can't defeat anyone there, so his only strategy is to avoid provoking them. A blonde demon girl says she has never actually seen the human living in the castle. Her friend says she missed the incredible moment when he killed the hero, then turned around and declared that his name was Demon Arut. They completely misunderstood his name, and the girl remarks that she has never heard a more sinister demon name. Standing nearby, the protagonist thinks these idiots have it all wrong. His name is Dion Hart. Her friend quickly covers her mouth and tells her to let him pass, or they'll both die. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks he could die at any moment because his body is so fragile. He can't understand how these misunderstandings keep spreading like wildfire. At the same time, he can't let anyone discover his weakness, or he'll be cast out and killed. He must maintain his confident act, so he walks toward the door. The guards stationed there are chatting cheerfully, but the moment they notice him, they freeze and immediately greet the commander, then order the doors opened. The commander of the Zeroth Corps is announced. The Demon King says he has finally arrived. The protagonist only stares, though inside he is completely bewildered. On the left, the Demon Jiker tells him to sit beside the king. On the right, the blue-haired Aseald thinks the boy looks weak, yet says fighting the strongest person there would be incredible. The bulky, bald demon Bellatin calls him powerful but arrogant for arriving late. The fiery redheaded Delia smacks him and says the commander must have had his reasons. Meanwhile, Lillinel thinks that Bald Fool should show the commander more respect. The protagonist sits down, wondering why everyone is gathered. He feels so uncomfortable that he already wants to return to his room. The king asks how he feels, and Dion says he's fine before apologizing for being late. Then a demon approaches and asks whether he would like a drink. Dion says nothing aloud but inwardly celebrates. These meetings always serve the rarest wine in the region, one of the few reasons he enjoys attending. Then he realizes it isn't wine this time, it's grape juice. He looks confused while for some reason, all the demons hesitate. He slams the table and asks why everyone else received wine while he didn't. He assumes they're discriminating against him because he's human. That's when the king says it was his order. Dion immediately panics, wondering whether the king discovered his worthlessness and no longer wants to waste alcohol on him. He's already imagining himself being sentenced to death. But the king explains that this meeting is actually about him. He immediately orders Bellatin to explain everything in detail. Bellatin reports that the 12th Corps has held the line so far, but urgently needs reinforcements. Part of the area has been evacuated, but the rest of the residents remain trapped behind the wall and must be rescued before the worst happens. Everyone at the table whispers in confusion, wondering how things became so serious. Even Dion is surprised. Demonic creatures are essentially failures created by the Demon King. They lose control and rampage wherever they please. But Dion can't understand what that has to do with him when the meeting is supposedly about him. Bellatin explains that the war is intensifying and more monsters keep appearing, though no one knows why. The king says the reason they're accumulating is obvious, since the hero was killed. Who remains to slay the monsters now? Dion realizes they consider him responsible because they believe he killed the hero. Are they really planning to blame everything on him? He glares at the Demon King, since that bastard also wanted the hero dead. Demon King meets his gaze and seems to read something in his eyes. Then he laughs and declares that the Zeroth Core will provide reinforcements. The protagonist is caught off guard, and the king says he can go there, settle things down, and kill a few creatures. Off to the side, Bellatin seethes with envy because the king is entrusting Dion with a task the entire army couldn't handle. He can't understand why the king has so much faith in him. Dion says he still hasn't fully recovered, while inwardly begging the king to reconsider. Sealed mutters that the boy doesn't want to go, but Jiker says he has misunderstood. That might be true of anyone else. But the commander is clearly suppressing his thirst for battle because he would rather fight on an even harsher front. Hasselt is astonished and admits he hadn't realized that. He grows excited, now convinced the boy is not only strong but also capable of judging situations clearly. The king clarifies that he isn't asking Dion to go on a killing spree. He only wants him to visit, relax, and oversee things. Dion knows it will be difficult and doesn't want to go at all. Still, everyone is staring at him, their faces glowing with expectation. So he finally says fine, he'll go. He ends up riding in the carriage, once again dragged into a situation he has no idea how to handle. As soon as he returns to his quarters, Dion packs his bags and leaves. At least he escaped that immediate problem. Deep down, however, he knows life outside won't be much better. Near the Empire is the Mad Emperor who originally ordered him to kill the Demon King. Worse, his older brother hates him and has always wanted him dead. He tries to look on the bright side. The Zeroth Corps is extremely capable, especially Ed, who is among the strongest. When a soldier announces they have reached the village, Ed immediately orders everyone to hold formation. Dion tries to calm himself. He doesn't really need to do anything. He only needs to stay quiet and let everything resolve itself. Meanwhile, he's drinking the Demon King's special wine, which he obviously stole before leaving the meeting. At this point, he's practically dead already, so he might as well enjoy himself. It has been a long time since he felt this alive. Outside the carriage, Ed finds his silence strange. Could Dion be depressed because of what happened before they left? Earlier, as the protagonist approached the carriage, someone told him he absolutely could not ride a horse and had to travel inside. Dion thought that was exactly what he intended to do. Why would he ride those disgusting headless horses? So he stepped inside, said fine, and folded his arms. Ed thought only time could heal him and assumed Dion secretly wanted to ride a horse. But ever since his health deteriorated, he has been forced to suppress his desires. Even so, he can only obey the king's order to use the carriage. Just then, a demoness at the front announces their arrival at Adjuvant Village, only for them to find the entire place engulfed in flames. Bodies lie everywhere, showing that the villagers were massacred, and the creatures had already wiped out the town. Ed warns everyone to stay alert because the monsters can't be far away, and sure enough, they appear just ahead. He orders everyone to prepare for battle and protect the commander, saying he trusts them all. The demons charge forward, and the battle begins. But Ed quickly realizes that the monsters seem endless. Suddenly, a massive werewolf lunges at him, and he realizes he let his guard down. The scene shifts to someone asking the king whether that army alone will be enough. It's Jykar, who says there are too many monsters and they should have sent more support. But the king insists that the Zeroth Corps is exceptionally powerful, and even if danger arises, they can rely on that person. Wait, was that the protagonist who just cut through the beast? The monster falls dead, leaving Ed stunned by the corpse lying on the ground. He immediately calls out to the commander, but the boy points a dagger at his face and asks whether he's an enemy too. Ed realizes Dion is behaving as he does when drunk and quickly assures him he's not an enemy. The protagonist then asks whether the creature over there is the enemy. The wolf lunges at him again, and the boy is blasted into the ground. What the hell? I thought he'd shrug it off like a Chad. But no, he gets completely smashed against the wall. He says he now knows who the enemy is, then rushes forward with a storm of slashes, declaring it's time to go insane. Another 4 or 5 monsters charge from both sides, but he only tightens his grip on the dagger and cuts through them all. The rest of the army freezes in shock, watching their commander, the man who never leaves a corpse intact. He grabs another creature and says it's her turn. Everyone knows he never stops cutting until he's certain the enemy is dead. The surviving monsters become too frightened to attack as He finishes off yet another one. The scene shifts to a castle where someone informs His Majesty that he saw the Zeroth Corps. According to the report, they were every bit as powerful and merciless as the rumors claimed. Emperor Edward of the Desert says it reminds him of someone, and now that the demons are moving, the Empire cannot remain idle. He declares that they have the perfect person for the task. In other words, he is giving that man a chance to bring honor to the Empire. The man humbly accepts His Majesty's command, and the Emperor orders him to become that kind of talent, which is apparently the story's title. The next chapter recounts the 8-year war, when rivers of blood were spilled for the Empire's glory. On the front lines, where warriors sacrificed themselves for the cause, the protagonist says they weren't soldiers at all, merely disposable meat shields. That place was the very definition of hell. As the warriors continued fighting, shouting that everything was for the king, Dion could only think it was a joke. He had never asked to be there. He had no intention of dying for the Empire that had thrown him into that hell. He was only trying to survive. Dying for them was never an option. Suddenly a figure appeared behind him, looking exactly like him. It approached and told him to stay alive and take revenge. Immediately afterward, the protagonist wakes in bed, gasping for air and wondering what that dream meant. He tries to rise, staggering slightly until someone says he is finally awake. Ed stands there looking worried, while Ben says he was terrified when he found him covered in blood. The protagonist has no idea how he ended up there. The blonde explains that the hunt succeeded, and Dion lost consciousness after slaughtering countless monsters. He even apologizes for not being strong enough to offer more help. Dion has no idea what happened after the blessing ended and asks what they mean by him blacking out. Ben says his severe injuries may have caused memory loss. Dion is confused, but he does remember taking a sip of the drink before crashing into the rock. Could he have gotten drunk and done something foolish? This wasn't an ordinary injury, though. He completely blacked out and remembers nothing that followed. Ben reassures him that the army completed the mission without a single casualty, and that Dion inspired them all, but Dion insists he did nothing. The doctor tells him to stop being modest, but Dion only wants to understand how the rest of the army handled everything. He even apologizes to Ed for getting involved and causing so much trouble. Ed smiles and says the opposite is true. Dion was phenomenal, and taking the initiative to wipe out the creatures was the very definition of leadership. Still, Ben advises him to take things easier. However strong he is, his body remains damaged from past battles and needs care. Dion remains baffled because he doesn't remember killing any monsters. So the question is whether he only becomes strong while drunk or simply forgets every fight. Ed reassures him that the army will only grow stronger and that he can rely on them. Dion, however, feels uncomfortable and wants those bastards out of his room. Then 2 more demons enter, one beautiful and the other a hulking brute, saying they heard he was awake. The brute tells the woman to be quiet because Dion is still recovering. The 2 argue over how to properly respect the commander until Jakar arrives and orders them both to be silent. They only came to check on him, not make him uncomfortable. Apologize. But Dion is already fed up and orders everyone out of the room, while wondering how he can make these bastards disappear for good. The others assume he is stressed, and Jakar even tells him not to kill everyone in the castle. Dion is baffled. How could he possibly kill those 3? Not even a miracle would make that possible. Then he remembers that if they ever discover his weakness, they won't show him any mercy. He wonders whether showing mercy now might improve his own chances of survival later. Maybe they would spare him if they ever learned the truth. Just then, Assild apologizes in case he upset him, and Dion admits he is stressed, while thinking he must choose his words very carefully from now on. The others hesitate, so he tells them that anger never justifies violence. Mercy is often the wisest choice, and they should remember that word. Even if someone lies to them or proves weaker than expected, that person still deserves mercy. Dion desperately hopes they remember. The group looks disappointed and merely says they understand. Dion can't understand. Do they think he's just a loudmouthed human who talks too much? Jakar, however, sees it as a strange display of forgiveness, then reports the mission's success and praises Dion's work. Idelia cheerfully says the entire castle is discussing his heroic feat and how he wiped out half the creatures alone. The protagonist assumes it's another false rumor. He wonders who keeps giving him credit for other people's work. Seeing Ed grin like an idiot, he wonders why that bastard looks so pleased. Then Assild says he heard about Dion's performance and came to make a formal request. Dion asks what he wants. Assild says that once Dion is fully recovered, he wants the chance to fight him. But this bastard ranks 3rd in the king's personal guard, and Dion knows he has no chance. Now it's obvious why the king gave him grape juice instead of wine. He hesitantly asks whether Assild truly wants to duel him. Sild eagerly says yes, explaining that he wants to witness Dion's power and perhaps learn something. Jakar agrees it would be interesting. thinking that the commander has never fought anyone in the army, and this is the perfect chance to observe his skills. Idelia is equally thrilled, curious about the powerful commander and his fighting style. Watching him would be incredible. Dion wants to refuse, but all three stare at him with excitement. He desperately wants to say no, but worries about what they'll think. One look at Aesild makes the danger obvious. That man could kill him with a single punch. Still, Dion says it isn't a good idea. The battle against the creatures is still recent, so someone could die. But Aesild assumes the boy is merely afraid to fight him. The protagonist realizes his excuse isn't working. Jakar then says he's impressed by such confidence, believing the commander refused only because he fears killing poor Aesild. He freezes and stares at Dion in embarrassment, asking whether that is true. Startled, Dion has no idea what to say. Jakar warns Aesild not to press the matter because the commander refused only to avoid killing him. Sealed trembles and asks whether it's true, suddenly convinced he would die in the duel. He assumes the commander knows he would win without question, while Aesild foolishly believed he might have a chance. Now he understands why the king places so much trust in Dion's talent. Lowering his head, he admits he can't be sure he would win or even survive. If it were truly a fight to the death, he would rather decline. Though his pride is wounded, he thanks Dion for considering everyone's safety. Dion notices that Aesild actually seems at peace with the decision. Meanwhile, Ed is impressed that even the most aggressive demons respect him. The protagonist is simply relieved to be off the hook, but then Aesild says he hasn't given up. Once he's strong enough not to die so easily, he will ask again. Naturally, that's the worst possible outcome for Dion. He only hopes Aesild will abandon the idea. But Aesild declares that he is motivated to grow stronger and return for the challenge. He says goodbye and leaves to train. Jakar praises the protagonist, saying Aesild had been discouraged lately, yet Dion restored his spirit with only a few words. The protagonist is already staggering, so Ed steps in to support him, apologizing and explaining that the commander needs rest. The others apologize as they leave, while Dion once again wishes he could escape this place. Then Jakar says that after Dion fights Aesild, he wants a match as well, and is already looking forward to it. The protagonist collapses onto the bed and says he's going to sleep. He needs to escape the demon kingdom soon. Sometime later, he stands outside, exhausted. Ed spent all day asking him to speak with the army. The doctor ordered him to focus on recovery, and demons kept challenging him to spar. He can't understand why everyone wants to interact with him. Frustrated, he kicks a rock and yells for them to leave him alone. The rock strikes two demons in the head, naturally. They turn around angrily to see who threw it, only to spot Dion standing there, immediately bow, wish him goodnight, and apologize for the noise. The protagonist has no idea what they're talking about, but they explain that an incubus was causing trouble, and they were trying to remove him. That same incubus now trembles before Dion, despite supposedly possessing one of the world's most powerful forms of magic. Everyone else scatters, leaving the protagonist unsure what to do with the trembling boy. The incubus thinks he's doomed. He knows the commander is quiet but more brutal than any demon when angered. He even cries and says this is the day he dies. But Dion gently extends a hand and tells him to stand, saying the others have already left. The demon looks touched and wonders why Dion is treating him kindly. He says he's an incubus and knows everyone despises him. Dion simply takes his arm, pulls him upright, and asks why he believes that. He pats his shoulder and tells him not to worry. Overwhelmed, the demon says Dion is too kind and has made him happy. Perhaps he can repay the favor whenever Dion has some free time. Hold on. Incubi usually give women strange dreams, while succubi do that for men. What exactly is this kid planning? Meanwhile, the demon asks where Dion is going, but Dion has no idea what kind of free time the boy means. The incubus offers him a small gift of gratitude, a plant that will aid his recovery. He knows Dion is a busy commander, but offers to show him where it grows. Dion didn't even know the castle had a garden containing such plants. The young demon apologizes for not introducing himself sooner, saying his name is Heen and he tends the castle garden. Dion is surprised that such a peaceful occupation exists in this violent world. He immediately imagines beautiful flowers, tranquil scenery, and fresh air, the perfect setting for some therapy. He admits he needs somewhere relaxing and asks Heen to take him there. Heen tells him to follow, while Dion celebrates the thought of finally resting. And so, they arrive. Dion remarks that the garden is actually rather cute. Fresh plants and clean air surround him. Then, of course, the first plant he sees tries to bite him, and he barely dodges in time. Heen quickly scolds the plant for misbehaving and biting a visitor. Did it want another lesson? The plant immediately droops, and Heen apologizes, saying it was simply excited to meet him. The protagonist is convinced the plant sensed his weakness and attacked immediately. Now that he understands what kind of garden this is, he decides to leave quickly. He says he just remembered another obligation and waves goodbye. Heen asks where he's going, and Dion says he's heading to the training hall. He needs to meet the army and begin practicing as soon as possible. He says goodnight and leaves Heen standing there in confusion, thinking it must be something urgent. Heen decides to give him a gift next time, since Dion seemed to like the plant so much. Meanwhile, the protagonist shudders at the thought. He was foolish to believe anything here could be normal. Now he only wants to return to his room, the one peaceful place, before running into anyone else. He especially wants to avoid the army because he's certain he got drunk, acted foolishly, and embarrassed himself. He recalls Ed telling him to give some kind of motivational speech because he never addresses the troops. In truth, that was only Dion's interpretation. Ed never actually said anything like that. He heads to the training hall and finds it completely empty. No one has arrived yet, and since he's supposed to give a speech, he wonders where to sit. Then he notices several wooden swords and picks one up to practice. He remembers nothing because he was drunk, but now he can at least observe these soldiers in action. But the moment he swings the sword, it drops to the floor because it's too heavy. Embarrassingly, he can't even lift a wooden sword, much less a steel one. With muscles this weak, he should stick to using a dagger. Then he notices something beside him. An entire group of demons is staring at him wide-eyed. The protagonist wonders whether they witnessed what happened. In their eyes, however, he stands there glaring at them and ready for battle. Everyone becomes excited, asking whether the commander is all right and saying they were worried. They praise his incredible performance on the last mission, saying they have never seen anyone like him. Dion tells them all to calm down, while trying to understand what these lunatics are talking about. Everyone is staring at him emotionally, and he has no idea why. So he says that, unfortunately, he couldn't visit them after the mission, then praises everyone who participated. His real goal is to give them freedom to train and act however they like. He tells them they don't need his help, because they're already excellent at their duties. Suddenly, one of them draws his sword and charges forward. At that exact moment, the protagonist stumbles. He doesn't want to fall because it would humiliate him before everyone, but as he crouches, the blade passes over his head. Shocked, the attacker asks how he dodged. Dion has no idea, while everyone else rushes over to ask whether the commander is safe. The protagonist realizes this place isn't safe, and tries to turn quickly. He accidentally drives his elbow into the attacker's face, knocking him flat on his back. The man curses him as that bastard demon Arut. Then the protagonist notices something. The man before him is human. Come to think of it, his dream showed two versions of him. Could the other one be interfering? There's no way he's simply this lucky. The rest of the army calls to the commander, and the protagonist realizes nobody recognizes the man. The intruder says he must escape immediately, but when he turns aside, Dion is already there, slashing him down. Dion knows he can't let such a dangerous man escape, so he strikes without hesitation. The man collapses. Dion immediately orders them to notify the Demon King and imprison the intruder. He simply waves goodbye and walks away, leaving the others to think the commander must be disappointed. They allowed an intruder inside, and Dion ended up being attacked. Still, one soldier marvels at how natural his movements looked. One moment he was walking casually, and the next, he moved in one perfectly fluid motion, dodging and spinning into an instinctive elbow strike. It was terrifying. The poor fool was defeated instantly. Dion was so exceptional that the rest of the army felt like mere shadows beside him. One soldier reflects that despite training hard, he never imagined the commander remained so far beyond him. Everyone celebrates and vows to train harder so they might someday compare themselves to him. Meanwhile, Dion has sprained his wrist, merely from swinging the wooden sword. Still, the army can handle the intruder, so he decides to return to his room. Sometime later, he wakes groggily and finds someone already beside him, the Demon King, who says he slept like a rock. The protagonist wonders whether he's dreaming, but the king says this is reality. He knows the boy just woke up, insists that Dion accompany him. Naturally, that's the last thing Dion wants. He is just awakened and only wants to rest. But since the king came personally, it must be urgent, so Dion asks whether this concerns the intruder. The king rests a hand on his shoulder, confirms it, and tells him to come. As they descend the stairs, the protagonist wonders why they're heading to the castle dungeon. Perhaps the intruder is still alive or revealed something important. When they arrive, the man is torn apart, surrounded by corpses. He has been utterly destroyed. Dion immediately asks what happened during the night. The king tells him to look closer and asks whether the man seems familiar. Dion finds him strange. He is a human powerful enough to slaughter countless demons, and appears to grow even stronger when facing the Demon King. Then Dion realizes the truth. This man is what they call a hero. Dion knows heroes facing the Demon King have only two choices. They can self-destruct, inflicting critical damage if the king is nearby, or they can scatter their power into fragments, granting others throughout the world a hero's strength. Most heroes choose the second option because the empire depends on those fragments, which essentially create more heroes. Moreover, the honor attached to the second option is far greater than the first. The king laughs bitterly, saying it's absurd for them to send a hero like this into the demon's sacred land. Perhaps he wasn't a true hero at all, only a candidate or even a failed hero. Dion knows an official hero would be much stronger, but no hero should ever be discarded so casually. There must be a reason this man was sent here. Dion calls out to the king and asks for a private word with the prisoner. The king agrees to wait outside, and Dion assures him it won't take long. Dion wants to know why the man came directly to him without bringing any message. The prisoner calls him Dion Hart and curses him as a traitor. His Majesty trusted Dion to become a hero, yet Dion betrayed the empire and sided with the demons. Suddenly Dion laughs and says this must be a desperate attempt to gain his attention. In truth, the man was nothing more than disposable. The prisoner continues accusing him of treason, but Dion cuts him off and says no. The fact that he calls Dion a traitor only proves how worthless he is. He doesn't understand what he did to make the emperor hate him enough to send him here to die. After all, the emperor knows everything. He knows why Dion is in the demon kingdom and the ultimate purpose behind it all. So has the protagonist truly been abandoned, or is there a larger plan? Even the prisoner begins wondering whether the emperor really forsook him. Dion simply waves goodbye and tells him to think carefully before he dies. The man pounds the ground, screaming that he gave everything to the empire and will never forgive that cursed bastard. Outside, the protagonist reflects on how fragile loyalty is. He shouldn't have bothered because speaking to that man was a waste of time. The king asks whether he's finished. Judging by Dion's expression, he already found the answers he wanted. Dion says the decision belongs to the king, but recommends killing the prisoner. The king agrees and says they will handle it. In exchange, however, Dion will owe him a favor. The protagonist looks displeased, and the king explains that Jaikar sent an emergency request. This time, they aren't facing a candidate, they're facing a true hero. And as everyone knows, heroes and demons are never a good combination. The protagonist knows that if the person on the front lines isn't merely an abandoned fighter, but an actual hero, the demons have little chance of victory. But the king says he knows Dion must be curious as well. Why would the emperor send a fragment directly to them? This is Dion's chance to discover the answer. Suddenly, the protagonist wonders when he arrived there. The demon is already approaching. I'm telling you, this boy has a split personality. That explains how he deceived the prisoner earlier. His other side was speaking, which is why he suddenly seemed so sharp. Now he doesn't even understand where the demon king intends to send him. Still, there he stands beside the carriage. He remembers following the king into the dungeon, but afterward found himself outside being ordered to leave, making him even more confused. He has no idea why the king wants to send him to the front. Then Ed appears and announces that they're ready. Dion says he understands, knowing a new hero is about to appear. Since he has no choice, he at least wants to see this new hero. On that point, the king is right. Dion is curious too. Meanwhile, Ed thinks the monster hunt satisfied only a small part of Dion's bloodlust, but not enough. Despite the danger awaiting at the front, the boy advances with a smile. At that moment, Lillinel sweetly calls out to the commander, saying she missed him terribly. Dion, confused, wonders why she's there. He feels uneasy because she is second only to the king in power and is extremely difficult to read. Then, acting sweet and gentle, she says she knows he's heading to the front and brought him a small gift. He doesn't know what it is and finds her suspicious. But the moment she says it offers protection, he snatches it and calls it perfect, because he would never refuse anything that might keep him alive. Then he realizes he accidentally patted her head. Ed grows emotional and says how wonderful it is that she's helping the commander, while Lillinel praises how deeply Ed cares for him. The two gush about protecting Dion forever, until he tells them to calm down and start moving. Inside the carriage, Dion wonders why everyone thinks he killed that hero. He didn't. Not only did he not kill him, he never tried to stop the self-destruction, nor did he shield anyone from the explosion. Back then, he was just another comrade. The brown-haired warrior called out to him, telling Dion to leave. Confused, the protagonist asked whether he was certain, and the man confirmed it. He was an imperial soldier, and ending the battle was his duty. Dion tried to respond, but the man cut him off and said he had already done enough. The Demon King was stronger than anyone, and the warrior could no longer guarantee everyone's survival. At least one person had to return to the Empire with the information, and that person had to be Dion. He also knew Dion still had matters to resolve. That was why he wanted him to leave. He believed Dion was destined for great achievements, so he had to survive and return to the Emperor. With that, he waved goodbye and wished Dion luck. A long time passes before Dion wonders whether the battle has ended. He wants to know what happened but can't move, unsure whether guilt, shame, or something else is holding him back. In the end, however, he is the one who must deliver the information. He forces himself to stand, see what happened, and prepare to return. That's when he comes face to face with the Demon King and the others surrounding the hero. The king asks for the hero's final words, but the warrior only laughs and begins to glow. Watching from above, Dion instantly recognizes self-destruction. It appears everything is about to end, and he must carry the information back. Just then a demon behind him demands to know who's there. The creature lunges, shouting that Dion is hiding like a rat. Its strike smashes into the ground, but Dion manages to evade it. The bastard appeared without warning, and now Dion is in trouble. Another attack comes and he steps back just in time, suffering only a shallow cut across his face. Now he must survive if he wants to deliver the information. The monster charges again, but Dion dodges every strike, slips beneath it, leaps upward, and lands on its head, driving a hoe into its neck. The problem is that the monster reacts, and Dion realizes the blade didn't go deep enough. He has no idea what to do, when the entire mountainside suddenly collapses, sending them both plummeting. The watching demons shield their faces, as smoke and debris fill the air, while the protagonist wonders whether he's still alive. Then he notices that the beast beneath him is at least dead. He killed but after falling from the mountain, he now stands directly before the demons, who wonder who he is, how he killed the 7th commander, and why he's so powerful. Dion immediately realizes he's in grave danger. He killed a commander before the entire enemy army. Worst of all, the Demon King himself is standing there, staring directly at him. At that moment, someone calls his name. It's the warrior, who demands to know why Dion is there, and whether he knew about the self-destruction. Dion apologizes and admits he failed to escape as ordered. The man says he wanted Dion to survive more than anyone. To him, Dion was the kindest person he had ever known, and he wanted him to become the next hero. He asks whether the world is watching, and begs the boy to keep living. Instead of self-destructing, he begins to glow, transferring fragments of his power into the protagonist. The Demon King immediately recognizes the process as a power transfer. Dion knows such a thing is impossible. He thinks the warrior was foolish. He should have known no one can deliberately transfer all that power, and was an idiot to cancel the self-destruction just to try. Dion lowers him to the ground, thinking that he feels no different in the end. He's still the same weakling as always, but the demons whisper that he survived a hero's explosion, even so it clearly came at a terrible cost. He falls to his knees and coughs up blood. Dion knows one thing for certain. He came far, but this is the end of his story. Then the king asks why. He's smiling and demands his name. He answers that his name is Dion Hart. The king says he likes him. Dion searches for a chance to escape, but the king instead invites him to fight by his side. Dion is stunned, and the king explains that no one will object because everyone witnessed what he did. He killed a commander and endured a hero's attack. Dion realizes he somehow survived, but this isn't how things were supposed to unfold, and everyone in the castle comes to believe he can kill a commander and survive an attack powerful enough to slay even the Demon King. At that moment, Ed opens the carriage and announces that they have reached the border between the Demon Kingdom and human lands, the front line where battle never ends. Jykar appears, battered and exhausted, saying they have been waiting for Dion. His hands tremble, and Dion thinks he should have retreated instead of coming here, but he never truly had a choice. He laughs and says life is a curse. Jykar thinks only the commander would arrive, laughing and eager for battle, but asks him to restrain himself because his moment is approaching. Dion has no idea what moment he means, so Jykar explains that he and everyone else will enter battle as soon as the Empire attacks again. Now I can't stop wondering why the king knows Dion absorbed the power instead of simply enduring it. So who is really playing 4D chess here? Dear God, I need answers. Then I remembered. While possessed in the cell, Dion told the prisoner he had an agreement with the Emperor, who knew everything. Could the Emperor be controlling his second personality? My God, I need to stop overthinking and follow the story. I'll eventually find out. Meanwhile, on the Empire's front lines, word spreads that the Zeroth Corps has arrived with its commander. Apparently his presence lifted the troops' spirits, while the humans on the other side were far less motivated. The captain hesitated. He hadn't expected the commander, the king's trump card, to actually appear there. He'd heard this man was the most exceptional of them all. The man to his right asks what they should do now, since victory is no longer guaranteed. The captain replies that they'll have to send the assassin, but the mustached officer argues that the chances of success are slim. The captain answers that they at least need to confirm whether this man truly exists. The rumors are terrifying, but perhaps they were all fabricated, an illusion created by the Demon King to boost his soldiers' morale. This then is the current human hero, No Man's Cruel. He says that if the assassin can confirm the boy's existence, that alone would be an achievement. The scene shifts to Ed wrapping bandages around our boy, who is, of course, trying to figure out how to avoid the battle entirely. The problem is he's the commander of Zeroth. How is he supposed to simply walk away? Ed asks if he's okay, since his constant trembling makes it hard to bandage him properly. Dion says he is and tells him not to overdo it. There's no need to be so careful. After all, his real plan is simple: take one look at the hero, then run. But Ed stares at him worriedly, saying war could break out at any moment, so of course he needs to be careful. He even gets angry that the boy never takes care of himself. Dion can't understand why this man cares so much about him. All he ever does is cough up blood and faint. Why do they go to so much trouble for him? Maybe Ed really is an angel disguised as a demon, at least until he blurts out that they're ready to wipe those bastard humans off the face of the earth. And just like that, our boy ends up wrapped like a mummy, apparently receiving a special treatment created by the Demon King himself to preserve every bit of body heat and keep him in peak condition. On top of that, he's given a magic cloak, and Ed says it proves how valuable the commander is. The protagonist assumes the demon acts this way because he has power to spare. After all, a demon's magic is limited, and spent mana can never be restored. There's even a legend that the more mana demons use, the sooner heroes appear. So if the king spends it this carelessly, he must be confident he can defeat the next hero. With that, the mummy rat protagonist is ready for war. Full of excitement, Ed says he's certain the Zeroth unit will win this time. Dion simply thanks him and says he'll inspect the battlefield and the troops. Ed gets emotional, saying he's never seen him so motivated. But Dion's real goal is to find the perfect hiding place. Until, of course, he runs into everyone, all thrilled to see the commander standing there in the flesh. Everyone shouts that victory is now assured, while Jekar agrees with the king that the boy's presence raises everyone's morale. But high above, Maitri Soma is watching, finally laying eyes on the infamous commander of Zeroth. So the boy really exists. He looks smaller and weaker than expected, but his unnatural calm before battle and the intense aura around him prove he shouldn't be underestimated. Maybe the rumors weren't exaggerated after all. The assassin can either retreat after confirming the boy's existence or test how skilled he truly is. He chooses the latter and throws a poisoned dart at Diane, who, just as it's about to hit, crouches down and accidentally trips. The assassin stares in shock, then flees in a panic. Meanwhile, our boy is utterly confused, stumbling over rocks before the war even starts. He's certain he's going to die. Someone nearby asks what just happened, and he stands up, claiming he was only stretching. But now everyone is watching him, so how is he supposed to find a safe place to hide? The man in the tree sees him walking back and thinks perhaps he wasn't noticed. Or perhaps the boy simply doesn't want to raise the alarm yet, and will send his most skilled subordinate after him. Still, he can't be certain. That encounter wasn't enough to judge the boy's true ability, so he decides the next attempt will be his final chance. Just then, Ed asks what's wrong and whether he's already finished the inspection. Dion says yes and quickly changes the subject, asking about the Imperial Army's new hero. His friend replies that the man has hidden his face behind a helmet since he appeared, but everyone knows he's an exceptional swordsman. Listening from the rooftop, the assassin realizes they're talking about Lord Cruel. Could they have already discovered that he was the one who sent him? At that moment, Diane suddenly blurts out, "What's that over there? Alcohol?" He's furious. There shouldn't be any alcohol there, and worse, they won't let him drink while everyone else does. Ed apologizes, explaining that it was actually prepared for him. Diane's expression changes immediately, and he asks if he can really drink it. Ed says of course, pours him a cup, and Dion thanks him. Our boy is thrilled, but then he hears a strange sound. He looks behind him, and Ed asks what's wrong. He answers that it's nothing serious, but the assassin had thrown a pebble to distract him, and the moment Dion turned, he slipped poison into the cup, a poison so lethal it could kill anyone instantly. The assassin is certain he's finished. Dion is about to take a sip. He raises the cup, then hesitates, prompting Ed to ask what's wrong. Suddenly, Dion hurls the cup to the ground, saying the place is crawling with insects. But even he wonders why. The cup slipped from his hand like that. While Ed was pouring, a fly had been buzzing around. As Diane raised the cup, the insect kept buzzing by his ear and irritating him. He swatted at it without thinking, causing the cup to slip. At this point, I'm convinced it must be his second soul, that other personality at work, because there's no way he's this lucky. He starts to apologize, but Ed notices the cup sizzling and smoking on the ground, and realizes it was poisoned. He looks around, but finds nothing, warning only that an intruder is nearby. At that very moment, the assassin flees in desperation, muttering that he must report back to the Empire. Lord Cruel had to be warned. The demon army's commander was extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, Jokar announces that someone infiltrated the camp with the clear goal of assassinating the commander. Everyone is confused, wondering how no one noticed. But Jokar warns that they'll all be punished later for allowing an enemy to get so close. Diem stands just behind him, breaking into a cold sweat. He had almost died. Disappointed in himself, Ed apologizes, calling himself incompetent for failing to detect the intruder. Diem replies that he's actually impressed. If even Ed failed to notice, the assassin must have been incredibly skilled. He thinks it's about time he was relieved of this position anyway. Being commander is like painting a target on his back. Worst of all, that damned assassin kept him from drinking. Then he notices a bottle in someone else's hand. He immediately calls out to Ed, who insists he'll accept any punishment, but Diane only asks whether that bottle of wine is unopened. Ed says yes. So our boy snatches the bottle from the other man's hand and says the poison was in the cup, not the bottle. That means there's no problem with drinking it. The protagonist is acting like a drunk uncle, ready to risk his life for a drink. Back at Cruel's base, the assassin reports that DM is dangerous. He's 100% certain the rumors are true, and that they stand no chance against him. Cruel looks shaken. The assassin they sent was no amateur, yet he returned completely rattled. The only way they could defeat that man would be if they had that certain person. The mustached officer asks if he means the other Imperial hero, and Cruel says yes. Unfortunately, that hero isn't available. Their only option may be to retreat. The indecisive officer speaks up again, saying that if they retreat now, everyone will think they're afraid of the commander. Cruel slams the map and declares that they will retreat, but anyone who dares pursue them will meet a perfect death. Besides, it isn't worth raising their swords over this land where the sun never rises. His real plan is to show the demons that peace is possible as long as they don't invade human territory. The mustached officer agrees but asks what he should report to the Empire. Cruel says he was ordered to reclaim the lands taken by the demons, not expand beyond them. Now that they've reclaimed what was theirs, there's no reason to advance further. That's what he'll report. Cruel feels relieved. This won't ruin his first mission as a hero, and at least it will prevent people from doubting his abilities. He only hopes the demons don't cause too much trouble. The mustached officer reassures him, saying he heard this so-called commander rarely fights. But just then, someone bursts in and calls for the commander, reporting that the demons are advancing together with Zerof's troops. It's exactly what Cruel didn't want, and sure enough, our boy is there, slicing through everyone. Drunk and wielding a dagger, he's tearing people apart like a madman. The kid is dropping bodies non-stop, while Ed simply stands there watching. After finishing the bottle, he ordered an all-out offensive. Ed isn't about to complain though, since it has given them the upper hand. Another man collapses, and when he looks up, he sees only Dion and recognizes him as the very incarnation of a demon. If that wasn't the most dangerous creature alive, then he had no idea what was. Weeping in despair, he knows he'll die if he doesn't fight, but he's too terrified even to pick up his sword. Soon, he'll be nothing more than another mutilated body on the ground. DM tells him directly not to just stand there and to at least try something. He must give everything he has to survive, or he'll die far too quickly. But just then, an attack slams straight into him, sending the kid flying into a tree. Ed rushes over to help, then spins around and demands to know who dared attack him. And of course, it was the hero himself, who says that strike was meant to finish Dion in a single blow. Ed looks worried and asks whether the protagonist can still stand. Dion realizes he survived thanks to the protection Lenel had given him. While Ed panics, the man who fell earlier is overwhelmed with emotion, convinced that the Empire's hope has arrived. He celebrates, thinking he's safe now, only for Dion to walk past and cut him down, sending his head flying. Brutal. Then the protagonist walks straight up to the warrior, saying he'd been looking forward to meeting him. Cruel replies that hero is merely a generous title, but DM says he's curious because people haven't stopped talking about him. What strikes him as strange is how familiar Cruel's voice sounds, as though they've met before. So why not remove the helmet? Cruel says he won't remove his armor before an enemy. Besides, the person in front of him doesn't seem familiar at all. As he continues watching the boy, he wonders why this man would say that when they've never met. Diane, casually toying with his little dagger, suddenly says fine. If that's how it is, he'll simply end this. The attack aims straight for his eye. Diane manages to duck, realizing the boy is faster than expected, though he still lands a counterattack with his dagger. Both of them step back, and Diane praises his speed. Immediately afterward, Cruel rushes in again, forcing Diane to defend himself. Diane says he'll have to find out whether this man is truly a hero. Cruel unleashes a flurry of attacks, declaring that this is the test, while noticing that no matter how fast the commander is, his strikes are strangely light. Another blow to the hand sends Diane's dagger flying. and the protagonist seems to falter for a moment. Cruel sees the perfect chance to finish him. Diane quickly pulls another dagger from his leg and blocks the next strike. Glare at each other. Then Diane lands a powerful kick, forcing them both to retreat again. Cruel keeps thinking the commander's attacks are too light. Maybe he isn't taking this seriously, but that only works in Cruel's favor. Then Dion wonders whether the man has already noticed. He raises his hands and says it's been fun, but now it's time to end this. Cruel replies that the war isn't over, especially when the demons invaded first. But Dion counters that it ended the moment they killed the commander of the 9th Troop. Besides, they already reclaimed the land they wanted, so they have no reason to invade the demon kingdom. Cruel tells him to shut up, but Dion continues, saying neither side needs to waste more energy when both can simply defend their own territories. Cruel knows it isn't a bad proposal. He has reclaimed what he wanted, and the battle hasn't cost his side too much. The problem is that he feels he could defeat this commander if he pushed a little further. That's when Diane tells him to look at his own army. When Cruel turns around, he sees everyone exhausted and completely drained. No one is ready to continue fighting. So he agrees to retreat this time. He knows they're at a disadvantage, and withdrawing is both the smartest choice and the plan he wanted all along. Diane waves goodbye, saying he hopes they never meet again. Cruel ignores him, turns his back, and rejoins his army. Meanwhile, the demons celebrate, saying it was a nightmare, but fortunately they have a commander they can trust. Jekar, however, wonders whether that decision was truly right. The Empire had lost its will to fight, making this the perfect chance to advance. Still, he saw that Diane had been eager to fight, so he must have had a reason to stop. He places a hand on the boy's shoulder and praises him, but at that moment Dion only mutters for him to go to hell, then collapses, grumbling that this body truly is a curse. Jekar notices that his body is burning up, and wonders whether he truly fought at that level in such a condition. Perhaps that explains why he ended the battle, so the enemy wouldn't discover how poor his condition was. If he had collapsed in front of all those demons, the entire army's morale would have been crushed. In the end, his judgment of the situation had been perfect. No wonder he had appeared so suddenly and risen to commander. From defeating the 7th Squad's commander to blocking the hero's explosion, and even earning the king's recognition, everything proved just how talented he truly was. Even so, Jekar still had some doubts. But today, once and for all, he saw that Diane truly deserved his title. From now on, the demon could finally rest easy, because Diane would handle everything. At the Demon King's castle, Lilynell suddenly jumps up in alarm because the crystal she gave him has shattered. No creature should have been able to break it, so she's terrified that he must be in danger. She says she's leaving immediately to find out what happened, while her attendant begs her to stay because the Demon King ordered her to guard the barrier. Meanwhile, John has already arrived, and the Demon King praises his work. Guy glances over as the king happily continues praising him, saying Jekar reported that John did an exceptional job. He asks how the meeting with the new hero went, and John says he'll need to give a full report. The Demon King notices that the boy seems tense after the battle, so he says they'll talk later, since the second group's commander apparently has information as well. That commander apparently enjoyed dressing our protagonist in different outfits, and the king notices he doesn't seem to miss her much. But he shouldn't worry. She's far away for now, and they're only going to review some documents. While looking through the papers, Dion notices something strange. Suddenly, someone calls out to the commander, and that's when he finally regains awareness. Until that moment, he'd been trapped in that wild split personality state. Now he wonders how he ended up in the Demon King's castle. What happened? Wasn't he on the front line? He wakes to find Lilynell clinging to him, crying and covered in snot, saying how worried she was. DM is still trying to process everything and remembers that he drank again. He can't believe a single bottle made him black out completely. While Lilynell drools on his clothes and says she panicked when the necklace broke, Dion is shocked. That thing protects him once from instant death, meaning his life was truly in danger. Even so, she praises him for defeating the new hero, saying it was amazing. She clings to him with hearts practically floating around, while he realizes alcohol keeps making him lose control. Then he notices the document in his hand and opens it, reading the name Cruel Heart. Wait, that's the same last name as his. He laughs, because this is someone he could never forget for as long as he lives. That man is his older brother. We then see Cruel speaking to Diane, who's battered and crying. The boy begs his brother for help, but his brother raises his sword and slashes him. What the hell? Now it makes sense why the kid fled into the demon's arms. That family is worse than the devil. Dia strokes Lilynell's head and says he has matters to take care of. The purple-haired one says he looks frightening and asks whether Lilynell is all right, but she assumes he got angry and finds it wonderful, saying he looks gorgeous when he's worked up. Back in the room, Diane asks why the Emperor made that bastard a hero when he knows everything that happened, especially now that Diane was considering returning. We then see that the Demon King had asked whether it was time for him to visit the Empire. Diane says yes, adding that with permission, he'll gather information on the new hero. King tells him to travel safely, since staying away from the Empire too long would make people suspicious. He touches the boy's chest and places a spell on him so he'll always know Diane's location. The king waves goodbye and tells him to report back as soon as he learns anything useful. That was the conversation they had. Diane still doesn't understand why he has to serve as the Demon King's spy. First, it's obvious that extreme stress or difficult situations make him lose his memory, and avoiding that means avoiding stress, which isn't easy. At that moment, Ed says he heard Diane is leaving for the human kingdom today. Diane says yes, because there's something he needs to investigate personally, then asks what the problem is. Ed brings up something the Demon King said. We see the king asking Ed what he thinks about becoming a commander. He says the position would be in the 9th Army, which currently has no commander, and the Demon King confirms it. Ed has served as Diane's assistant, but the king says he knows Ed is more than capable of becoming a commander himself. Ed pauses to think. It had been one of his goals for a long time, but he put it aside to serve Dean. So he asks what would happen to his current position if he accepted. The Demon King answers that someone equally skilled would be appointed to assist Dean. He also tells Ed not to force himself. If he refuses, they can always appoint another commander. Of course, that would mean giving an important role to someone less capable. With that, Ed accepts. Meanwhile, Dean is trying to understand what he means. Strangely, Ed only says it's nothing, and decides not to explain yet. Instead, he says he'll ask the chefs to prepare whatever food Dion wants for the journey. Just then, someone enters and announces that the carriage is ready. Dion says goodbye, telling them he'll see them when he returns. But then he stops, thinking Ed may be resigning, so he hesitates and avoids mentioning it directly. Instead, he asks whether Ed wants anything, since he won't be visiting the capital often. He's thinking of special food or something that will keep for a long time. Ed laughs to himself, thinking no other superior would care so much about a subordinate. But he says he doesn't need anything. Diane replies that it's fine, then waves goodbye. Ed wishes him a safe journey, thinking that his respect for Diane grows each day. But that's not the whole truth. During his earlier conversation with the Demon King, Ed said he didn't want to become a commander. It would certainly be an impressive position, but helping Diane mattered more to him. He wishes him a safe journey and vows to wait for him for as long as he lives. Man, I have a feeling something tragic is about to happen. Next chapter begins with soldiers guarding a castle, complaining about how boring the day is. Then Dion appears, and the soldiers order him to stop, warning that this is the Hart family mansion. The count is away and no one is allowed inside, but Dion simply orders them to open the gate, and lowers his hood as they wonder who this confident young man is. The protagonist removes his bandages and says he wants to enter his own house. So what's the problem? Everyone immediately starts running and shouting, announcing that the count has returned and bowing at the entrance. Crazy. I thought he'd be treated more harshly at home. Diane thinks all this fuss is unnecessary as usual. The butler, named Remember, welcomes him home. Dion smiles and says it's been a while, and the man asks whether the hunt went well. Hesitant and confused, Dion says yes, noticing that everyone believes he went monster hunting. He's about to say, everything went fine when Remember suddenly touches his face. Says it's a shame the monsters did that to him. Oh, come on, Remember, you're not some little maid from a blonde man's story, so stop acting like one. The protagonist says he's not a child anymore, and the man agrees, saying he's now a respected count. He asks whether Diane wants his room cleaned, but Diane says no because he's going to see the Emperor first. Of course, he would much rather lie down and sleep. But now that he's returned to the Empire, the first thing he must do is speak with that man. Besides, he needs to ask about Cruel. The butler says he understands and will make all the necessary preparations. In an office, a purple-haired man named Stave at Luster says the Emperor's dog has finally returned to his master. Then he immediately asks Cruel, who's standing beside him, what they'll do now that the younger brother is back. Cruel calmly says he'll send a request to the Assassin's Guild, but Stave warns that they could be traced, then asks Salen whether they have a better option. The man with glasses asks whether he means the Revolutionary Army, and Stave says yes. They're a group determined to tear the Emperor from the throne. Even if they get caught, it won't matter. Cruel agrees and says he'll contact them. Stave gets excited, saying he's looking forward to seeing the hero's results. Back at the mansion, the maids are thrilled, saying our boy looks wonderful in his little cape. He's completely baffled. Since he arrived, these lunatics haven't stopped. They bathed him, changed his clothes, and did all sorts of things. Worst of all, they're standing there imagining him in different outfits and poses. Decides he needs to leave quickly and thanks Remember for taking care of the mansion while he was away. Remember says it was only his duty, then adds that he was waiting for Dion's return because he's exhausted and wants to discuss retirement. Dion panics. Remember is the only person capable of managing the estate since Dion himself does nothing. But then Remember laughs and says he was joking, leaving the boy both furious and confused, telling him to leave already. As he gets into the carriage, Dion says he doesn't need much security because very few people in the Empire know he's back. Sitting inside, he thinks that in the demon realm, he had to flatter the demon king, and here he'll have to do the same with the emperor. The worst part is that this man is no less terrifying than the demon king. Edward of Desert is the 9th prince who seized the throne by force. He killed all 8 of his brothers and sisters, murdered the king and took the crown. At least in a twisted way he earned it. But the throne he occupies is obviously soaked in blood, and the land once known as Inmation became known simply as the Empire from that day onward. He was arrogant enough to rename the entire nation, and naturally the other kingdoms began preparing for war. That war dragged on for 8 years and turned Dean's life upside down, creating memories so horrible he can barely recall them, which is probably for the best since he doesn't want to remember. During the war, Eduardo conquered another third of the continent and absorbed it into the so-called empire. In recognition of his role in that war, Dian received the title of Count. He doesn't clearly remember what he did, only that he had to fight for his life every day. What he can't forget is the goal he set for himself during that time, even though that same goal eventually enslaved him to both the demons and the empire. While he's lost in thought, the carriage begins to shake, and he steps outside to see what's happening. A fight has broken out, and Dia immediately notices that the men wear armbands marked with an eagle. At least they're foolish enough to make themselves easy to identify. But he also sees that the fight isn't going well for his side, and suddenly one of them appears right beside him. He starts to turn, but the man grabs him by the neck, and the entire area explodes. In an instant, he's thrown onto the carriage floor, while a man with an axe sneers that he's found the Empire's little dog. The Revolutionary Troop was an organization formed during the 8-Year War. As kingdoms were brutally conquered one after another, all that remained was the determination to eliminate the Emperor. The scarred man tells him this is the end. Dion isn't trembling like someone facing death. Instead, he stares the man down. But deep inside, he realizes that once again, this is all the Emperor's fault. Still, he has no intention of dying for their ideology. The man sneers that he's rather scrawny for someone with the title of hero. Dion tries to explain that he isn't the Emperor's dog. Strangely, the man releases him and demands his name. Our boy answers Dion Hart. The man immediately grabs him again, saying he really is that cursed dog. White hair and red eyes, exactly as the rumors described. The protagonist tries to stab the distracted man, but he blocks the attack with the handle of his axe. Then he slams Dion back to the ground, saying the fun is over. Blood is already spilling everywhere, and our boy is being badly beaten. The man finds it strange that someone like him is considered a hero. Perhaps the rumors were false. He raises the axe and tells him to blame the Emperor for what's about to happen to this false hero. But just then a spear comes flying in, blocking the strike, and knocking the axe to the ground. The scarred man looks back, and sees several men laughing, one of whom says he hit the mark perfectly. It turns out they're Imperial soldiers, and honestly they look even scarier than the enemy. These men in white robes are called the Death Knights, demons once led by Dian Hart during the 8-Year War. The scarred man orders someone to eliminate them, wondering how they arrived so quickly. But one knight pulls something from a bag and says it's been a long time since he had a proper fight. As the man consumes it, Dion thinks that what makes them terrifying isn't their skill, but the insane way they fight. They charge forward like a horde of zombies, killing with sheer brutality. They're clearly fighting for the fun of it. They're just like their master, bloodthirsty. Blood sprays everywhere, horrifying everyone nearby. The scarred man remembers why attacking Dion was always a terrible idea. Suddenly he feels a strange pain. Dion's hand is buried deep in his arm. He hurls the boy against the wall, but his arm has already been shredded. That must be the other personality. You can see the wicked gleam in his eyes. Our boy apologizes, saying he tried to tear the arm off but wasn't strong enough. Then he tells the man not to cry because the pain will end soon. With that, the arm is severed, and the body collapses to the ground. The protagonist steps out of the carriage, radiating swagger, his white clothes now drenched in blood. He picks up the axe, thinking that the man is already dead. Should he continue? Somehow, it still doesn't feel like enough. He must make an example of him, so everyone knows what happens when they cross him. He truly is brutal, absolutely merciless. He unleashes a flurry of strikes, saying he needs to create an unforgettable scene for everyone. The so-called Death Knights think that, as always, their captain shows no mercy, The blonde one even mutters that perhaps they shouldn't have come, but another knight tells him to look at the trash at Dean's feet. The men nearby are all shaken and defeated. Meanwhile, the protagonist, having apparently reduced the enemy to scraps, asks why they're still standing around. There are enemies left, and it's their job to kill them. The poor men before him tremble uncontrollably, and the beating must have been severe, because the scene cuts back to the castle, where everyone is horrified by the sight of the blood-red carriage. Some guards shout that this is the imperial castle, and that he cannot enter without an invitation. But the protagonist simply says Dion Hart, and declares that he's here to see the emperor. They immediately beg for forgiveness. He orders them to tell him where the emperor is, and they answer that he's in the ballroom. He asks why, and they explain that a celebration is being held for the birth of the new hero and his victory. The protagonist is still in that crazed state, and now he hears they're celebrating the arrival of a new hero. The irony stings because he knows they're cheering for his own brother, making me wonder how long Cruel has been tormenting him like this. The time he created that insane personality, he must have broken down countless times. The scene shifts to Emperor Eduardo Desert on his throne, praising everything Cruel has done. Cruel replies that he only did what was necessary. But the emperor stands and raises a toast to the success of his first mission, and everyone begins celebrating. Suddenly the doors swing open and Dion enters. Some people are about to scold him for barging in, calling it unacceptable, but others immediately recognize his red eyes and white hair. Nobles gathered there, likely all relatives, are stunned. This was the honorary Count Dion Hart. Now it becomes clear. He isn't part of the imperial family at all. He's really just the army's butcher. Cruel walks past, thinking to himself that this man really did obtain a hero's fragment, while Dion bows before the emperor and proclaims glory to the empire. He presents himself before his majesty, as the nobles whisper about all the blood. No wonder he's called the Vampire Count. No one knows how he was raised, but rumors say the Hart family treated the boy poorly. Stave, the purple-haired man, mutters that the cursed Dion actually survived. He was always hard to kill. At that moment, the emperor looks around and sees that our protagonist has left a trail of blood behind him. What, did he bring a bucket in his pocket? The emperor welcomes honorary Count Dion, saying he's free to come whenever he wishes, but not while drenched in blood during a celebration. What kind of insolence is this? The protagonist apologizes, but explains that he was ambushed on the way there. The emperor laughs and asks who dared attack the empire's hero, silently relieved that he sent those knights to protect the boy. The protagonist remains silent. Then the emperor rises and says Dion must have a lot to say. He also has matters to discuss, so they should speak somewhere more private. Our protagonist is both the Demon King's lackey and the emperor's lackey, trapped in a strange position. In another chamber, the emperor is certain the revolutionary army attacked him. He asks if Diane is all right, while thinking that Dion Hart has an overwhelmingly negative reputation. Far more people in the empire hate him than admire him. Yet one fact is undeniable. No one has done more for the empire than Dion Hart. During the Eighth War, he achieved things beyond description. And during the first hero's attack, he was the only one able to bring back the body, the sole survivor among the demons. Everyone else became food for the monsters. Without Dion Hart, that warrior would have suffered the same fate. He was the first person to survive an encounter involving the Demon King, but of course, it came at a price. The emperor asks whether he's found a way to break the curse Mark the Demon King placed on him. Dion answers that unfortunately he has not. The emperor doesn't know the mark is actually tracking magic, allowing the Demon King to always know his location. Eduardo believes it's a magic circle that weakens him. The emperor realizes the boy doesn't care about his own well-being. He sent him to the demon realm because it was his only chance to remove the mark from his chest. So the emperor tells him he'll have to return to the demon realm, though he feels guilty about sending someone so talented back there. Diem knows the speech is just a facade. The emperor is only using him as a spy. Eduardo then asks how things are at the demon castle. Diem replies that nothing has changed except for one small detail. The emperor presses him to explain, and Diem tells him about the assassin who was sent there. It seemed Eduardo simply wanted to dispose of that person, but he was actually a hero candidate. So why send someone like that into the demon realm? Eduardo explains that the man was nothing but a disgrace to the heroes. He expected him to die long before reaching the demon realm, but apparently the fragment carried him that far. At least he died before revealing Diane's plan, or rather the plan of Demon Arut, commander of the Zeroth troop. The protagonist is stunned that the emperor already knows about that too. He then rises and says it was impossible to refuse the commander's position. Unfortunately, he had no choice but to accept the role. The emperor replies that there's no problem. The more deeply he integrates into that group, the more intelligence he can gather. Then he asks what exactly the boy came to ask him. Diane immediately asks why Cruel Heart became a hero. The Emperor knows very well that Diane's only regret from the war was not killing Cruel when he had the chance. Aside from the protagonist, Cruel is the only survivor of the Hart family. Wait, the only one who survived him. Did he kill his own parents? Well, if he endured severe abuse, maybe that explains it. Then we see Cruel speaking to him when they were children, telling him not to keep their parents waiting. Sweet little boy apologizes and asks if it's time for dinner. Cruel tells him to hurry. The protagonist seems hesitant, asking whether they'll get in trouble or something. But his brother pulls his hand away, telling him not to touch him because he's dirty from training. Awkwardly, Dion apologizes and asks Cruel to wait just a moment. He wants to walk beside him, but his brother keeps moving ahead. Suddenly, Dion bumps his head into Cruel's back. Cruel turns and asks if he likes the painting that much, since he's always staring at it. Dion says yes, because it shows that they're a family. Cruel dismisses it, saying it's only a painting. Then he orders the boy to stop showing himself so often and spend more time in his room. Dion always felt lonely in that house. The maids whispered in the halls that he was different from everyone else. For some reason, he had white hair and red eyes, which was strange. He probably wasn't the family's biological child. But whenever the boy looked at that painting, he felt like part of the family. He wished he also had the black hair and green eyes, the signature traits of the Hart family. At the dining table, his father says Diane is late, and reminds him that he told them to come quickly. Meanwhile, his mother asks if Diane is all right. If he has a fever or anything else, he can stay home that night. Diane says no, he wants to go with them. His father snaps at her to stop offering, saying Diane can't stay home forever. She replies that she can't help worrying. He's extremely fragile, and something might happen if he goes out. His father grows even more irritated, saying they can't keep him locked away forever. Eventually, he must show his face in public, even if it sparks rumors. He also warns Dion to be extremely careful and never let anyone discover his flaw. With his head lowered, the protagonist says he understands and will be careful. That flaw, of course, is his unusual appearance, constant illness, and the way they tarnish the Hart family's reputation. Then Cruel asks about the new fencing instructor. Dion wonders if his brother deliberately changed the subject so they would stop focusing on him. His father laughs and says yes, especially since Cruel has been improving more every day. The moment he mentioned the instructor, the mood at dinner changed. Back then, Dion was certain his brother was incredible, but he still wondered if he couldn't feel like part of the family because he wasn't good enough. His plan was to train hard and become strong enough to match his brother, and once that happened, his family would love him. As he walks through the halls, someone calls out to him. It's a group of odd-looking young nobles, asking whether he's Dion Hart. No doubt those three fools were probably all cut down in the 18-year war. The poor, naive, clueless protagonist doesn't notice their malice. He thinks they're just friendly boys who want to chat. Cheerfully, he says, "Hi, I'm Dion Hart." The boy immediately starts talking about fencing, but one of the nobles asks why he's always alone. He must have been a little slow, because everyone already knew he was the black sheep of the Hart family, always hidden away and locked in his room. The protagonist tries to deny it, but the noble steps closer and says, his red eyes are extremely strange. Clearly, he doesn't belong to that family, which is why they don't love him and abandon him. The noble is about to call him an outsider again when Diane punches him. He warns him to watch his mouth, insisting that his family takes good care of him. Then he gets punched in the face. At least he struck first. I can respect that. Now he's simply being beaten down, while the boy shouts that he isn't really a Hart but a monster. Diem can only think about his family. Soon he's lying twisted and unconscious on the ground when he sees Cruel rushing over in shock. The scene shifts to the infirmary, where the doctor explains that his body is naturally fragile. He's extremely vulnerable to stress, and nearly anything can harm his health. His parents look shaken, saying no one in the Hart family has ever been like this, so how is it possible? Lying in bed nearly at death's door, the protagonist silently apologizes. Looking at them, he swears he'll try harder. He only asks them not to hate him. But then his brother, still so sweet at that age, tells him it's fine. He doesn't have to prove anything to anyone. After all, no one expected anything from him anyway. Strange, isn't it? And then, it turns out to have been a dream. Now he truly wakes up in bed. His mother enters the room and asks what happened, while his father says he warned him to be careful while they were away. Hesitantly, the protagonist explains that the other children started it. He remembers them calling him a monster, and wonders whether his father would even care if he said so. Maybe his father thinks the same thing those children did. He apologizes, and his father says perhaps it was too soon to let him leave his room. He'll be confined for a while longer. It would be better for him to stay there and think carefully about what he's done. The protagonist can't believe that his one chance to go outside only caused more trouble. The last thing he wanted was to disgrace the family. While writing inside his room, he hears voices outside saying they pity him because he never leaves. He hears his family laughing. He goes to the window and sees his father walking with Cruel. He wants to go outside too, but at the same time he knows that would be too greedy. To earn that right, he first needs to work hard until he's recognized. The first part of his plan is to build enough stamina to endure 30 minutes of practice. But by then, it is already night, and he says he's exhausted. He feels like he might die, but he can't stop. He keeps swinging the sword until Cruel suddenly appears and tells him to stop. Only then does Diane notice his brother is there. Cruel asks what he thinks he's doing and tells him to stop being foolish. He already ordered him to stay quietly in his room, and already told him he doesn't need to do anything. But the protagonist can't accept that he doesn't even have the right to try. Maybe they don't want him to because he's a failure. Suddenly though, he says fine, he won't do anything. He apologizes to Cruel, says he's going to rest, and tells him to leave. Then he stands at the window, wondering what he must do to earn the right to be loved. Sometime later, the butler enters and asks whether he'll eat in his room again. The protagonist, now 14 years old, asks where everyone is. Cruel, now 17, says they went out to handle something else. Dion thought he'd be training, but Cruel tells him to come along. He already finished his morning practice, and now it's time for chess. The protagonist agrees while Cruel wonders why he's being so polite. It seems that from time to time, he joins him for a little game of chess. During the match, Cruel mentions that the Empire is going through a turbulent period, which is why their relatives are so busy. Dion is certain he always uses that as an excuse to explain why they never visit him. Even knowing that, he sometimes chooses to believe the lie, because on rare occasions, their mother appears while thinking he's asleep. She places a hand on him, apologizes, and wishes him a peaceful night's rest. The poor boy is moved to tears, saying he had decided not to expect love, yet even the smallest gesture sparks hope in him. At that moment, Cruel reveals that after this match, he too will stop playing chess for a while. The protagonist says he understands, thinking it must be troublesome to come all the way here just to play chess. But Cruel says no. If war breaks out, at least one member of the family will have to be taken. Just as he says this, two men enter. By the end of it, it's clear the protagonist will be sent away. Or maybe not. Honestly, now I'm curious. Cruel asks why they're there, and the soldier announces that they've brought a message from the Empire. Where's the boy named Dion Hart? So that's it. The family locks him away, and now they'll send him to die so Cruel doesn't have to go. The butler points out that he's the boy sitting across from Cruel. The Imperial soldier immediately orders him to come along, saying they'll explain everything on the way. As he's dragged from the room, the other knights whisper, wondering why they're taking a boy who can't even hold a sword. At that moment, Cruel grabs the soldier's arm and says there must be a mistake. Dion isn't the one who should be sent. This has to be a misunderstanding. The man yanks his arm away and says House Hart already sent an official letter to the Emperor. They're only doing their duty, and if he has questions, he should ask his parents. As he's taken away, the protagonist doesn't even understand what they're discussing. From what he can gather, it seems his parents are sending him to war. But he spent his entire life sick and locked in a room. What is he supposed to do in a place like that? He imagines his mother's strangely apologetic face and thinks it can't be true. They would never do that. He looks back and calls out to Cruel, but the door has already closed. In that moment, he wonders whether his entire family truly wanted him dead. Maybe they thought it would be better to get rid of the failure who disgraced their name. I really want to see how this connects later, because right now it's confusing. But then we're already watching him awkwardly hold a sword while an army officer says he'd better toughen up if he wants to survive the battlefield. The poor protagonist can only think about how heavy the sword is. And of course, even the soldiers around him are whispering, asking why they sent the Hart family's disgrace, the sickly boy who never participated in anything. Our boy wants nothing more than to stay alive. But from that day onward, his life becomes hell. Now we see him twisted and struggling. Right in the middle of the battlefield, they truly threw the child into a war. People are dying everywhere, with bodies falling on top of him. All he can feel is fear. Fear of dying, surrounded by screams and the stench of blood. He lies beneath a corpse, crying that he wants to go home. When a soldier rushes over and cuts away the body, pinning him down, the soldier orders him to get up, grab a sword, and do something. If he doesn't know how to use a sword, then he should use his teeth or a dagger. Whatever it takes, he simply has to fight to survive. The poor boy panics, saying he can't die like this. And then it begins. He snaps, declaring that he will survive. From that moment on, he starts killing left and right, stabbing and slashing, striking in every direction. Sometimes he's terrified, coughing up blood and wondering how long his body can hold out. He wants to know when he can go home and why he has to be there at all. Even so, he drives another dagger into someone's chest. Clearly the boy has some natural talent. Can't throw a 14-year-old onto a battlefield and expect him to last, but he does. Of course, year after year passes as he continues surviving. From time to time, letters arrive for those on the front lines, with messages wishing them well and saying they're missed. But our boy, alone in his corner, receives only one letter. It informs him that he's been promoted to commander and will now be sent to another front line. That is when he decides to turn House Heart into a house of horrors. That cruelty begins the moment the door opens and he steps inside, accompanied by the butler, or was it someone else? Whoever it was, he says he has finally come to pay his respects. His father tries to speak. Dion cuts him down immediately. The family was right to send him away. Their only mistake was not vanishing from the house altogether. He could have loved him too, but apparently that was too difficult. He says farewell and strikes again, laughing like a madman, covering his face with one hand like the Joker. He says they deserved it. They should never have abandoned him. They should have given him the love he always wanted. Yet in that very moment he wonders why it hurt so much, even though he finally achieved the dream he'd clung to for so long. That's when Cruel opens the door and sees the boy, completely insane, weeping and drenched in blood. Shocked, Cruel asks what he thinks he's done. The protagonist begs him for help but then stops. A darker voice within asks whether he truly believes Cruel would ever help him. Dion agrees with the voice, then attacks. Cruel has no choice but to defend himself. In his madness, the protagonist shouts that Cruel always stood by and watched everything happen. As the fight drags on, he cries that the pain is unbearable, remembering everything he endured. Then, staring at his blood-covered hand, he realizes his body has reached its limit. Cruel moves in for the finishing blow, and all Dion wants is to kill him before dying. But suddenly he wakes up, leaving it unclear whether it was a seizure, a collapse, or something else. At that moment, a beautiful woman named Lion Rainer is beside him, asking what he was thinking about. He says it has been a long time since they last met. She replies that she's glad to see him doing so well. To him, she's the only person with a normal personality among this group of lunatics, and he's genuinely happy to see her again. But then he realizes they're in the ballroom and becomes confused. He has no idea what just happened. Then it becomes clear. We're back at the Emperor's celebration, the one he entered covered in blood. He only remembers being attacked by the revolutionary group in the carriage. So yes, we're back in the story's present timeline. I thought the massacre was some false memory, but no. It seems he truly killed them all. Lena asks about his conversation with the Emperor, saying he looked unwell afterward. Of course, he has no idea what conversation she means. He assumes the stress pushed him past his limit and caused him to black out again. He asks what this event is about, and she replies that he must be joking if he doesn't know. How could he enter without a clue? They're gathered to celebrate Cruel Heart's first victory. At that moment, Cruel himself appears and says it's good to see Diane. The protagonist replies that now he understands why he had such terrible dreams the night before. He says it has been a while since they last met, while bitterly thinking that this bastard has the green eyes and black hair he always wanted, the true symbols of House Heart that he thought he would never see again, and belongs to the one person he never wanted to face. Cruel explains that he came face to face with the commander of Zeroth in the demon realm. The protagonist asks what the problem is, wondering whether his brother has any idea that Commander was actually him. But Cruel continues, saying the man was skilled at motivating soldiers and somehow reminded him of Diane. He had never seen troops with such high morale. He heard his brother had always been a good commander, and wonders whether things might have gone even better with him there. Diane bursts into mad laughter, apologizing but saying Cruel must be exaggerating. After all, there's no world in which the two of them would fight side by side. Cruel simply says it's fine, while noticing that his brother's eyes haven't changed, and still hold that cold, indifferent gaze toward everyone. Filled with hatred for the man who dared speak to him, the protagonist turns away. He says he has other matters to handle and tells Cruel not to bother him anymore. He walks off to eat pudding, thinking the party is awful and all he wants is to leave. But why does that wretch Cruel insist on speaking to him? He doesn't want to say a single word to that man. Then Cruel asks whether he's hurt. The protagonist cuts him off, saying he's especially annoying today. He can take care of himself, so Cruel doesn't need to pretend he cares after all this time. Every time he was injured, he had to pretend he was fine, and they can maintain their silence, just as they always have. The atmosphere grows heavy as Cruel awkwardly begins to say something, but Stave suddenly appears, saying his heart feels warm at the sight of such brotherly love. The protagonist remembers that this man leads the nobles who oppose the Emperor. Cruel greets him politely, and Stave says everything is fine. He introduces himself to Diane, saying he's heard a great deal about him, and that it's a pleasure to meet him. The protagonist merely stares at his hand, then turns away. Everyone at the party seems shocked that he ignored a duke. This empire is truly full of irritating people. Honestly, the demon realm was better. At least it had interesting people. Not that he's into Lolas. No, FBI, don't do that. The entire party whispers while Stave stands there silently. But Diane ignores him, acting as though he doesn't care about anything. There was no way he'd speak while chewing pudding and risk drooling. That would be humiliating. So that's the explanation. He was acting far too boldly for someone usually so foolish. Noticing the Duke's growing anger, he reluctantly decides to greet him before things worsen. But just then, the Crown Prince, likely Eduardo's son Elphidus, arrives and calls out to the Duke. The protagonist keeps chewing, wondering whether he accidentally covered himself in honey today, because people won't stop approaching him. Elphidus remarks that the place is chaotic tonight, and Stave apologizes for being there. The prince says there's nothing to worry about, and that it's his own fault they haven't met sooner. But inwardly he wonders why Stave is speaking with Dion. He cannot allow that man to carry out whatever plans he has. He seems determined to protect our boy at any cost, and I don't even know why. Then suddenly someone else approaches and embraces Dion. Finally he has a fiery little admirer on this side of the world too, a Lady Desert, who says she missed our boy terribly. But then everyone turns in shock, because her hug makes him cough up an entire pool of blood. People begin calling for doctors. Our guy just took critical damage. Could her embrace really be that powerful? Normally, you'd expect airbags to soften the impact, not worsen it. Lime quickly covers his mouth, telling him not to speak so the bleeding doesn't worsen. When the Emperor appears with the first hero at his side, along with a general named Nemesis. Seriously, these names. Nemesis, cruel. It's as if everyone was branded evil at birth. Meanwhile, Alicia is a wreck, apologizing and saying it's her fault for failing to control her strength. Her brother apologizes too, but the Emperor dismisses it, saying a great hero like Dion wouldn't bleed from a mere hug. Clearly, he was already wounded. He must have been attacked on the way and suffered internal injuries. The protagonist is confused by all this. So many people suddenly appear, talking about him and fussing over him, while he only wants some peace and to leave. The Emperor suggests that he see a doctor, but Dion insists he's fine. Soon, others begin whispering that his weakness may be caused by the Demon King's curse. For our boy, that's perfect. It's exactly what he wants them to believe. He asks to be excused and says he's leaving. From what I can gather, he went insane back then, and from that madness he created this good personality to conceal the darker one. At least, that's how it feels. Fortunately, or perhaps fortunately, this is the kind of story that leaves us guessing at every turn. But just as he asks to be excused, he stumbles and nearly faints, only for Cruel to catch him by the arm. Damn it, where's a beautiful woman when he needs one? Instead, Cruel earns himself a slap. Dion shoves him away, telling him to back off, and saying he doesn't need his help. During 8 long years on the battlefield, he hated this man with every fiber of his being. So why does this bastard have the audacity to pretend he cares now? The Emperor steps in and tells him to calm down, saying he's clearly unwell and that going home is truly the best option. The protagonist realizes this is essentially a polite way of throwing him out. Normally he'd take it as an insult, but since this place feels awful, he simply bows and leaves. He exits through the door, and silence fills the hall. Stave, however, keeps staring at Cruel. I still can't understand why he even likes the protagonist, knowing full well that Dion killed their parents. He caught him in the act, but then again, maybe his name being Cruel isn't a coincidence. Outside, Stave tells Cruel that his younger brother treated him with blatant disrespect. Even after all the chaos Dion caused, the Emperor didn't punish him. Not only that, but Cruel himself seems strangely lenient with the boy. Cruel says he didn't want to ruin the atmosphere, but Stave interrupts, saying Cruel misunderstands. He knows exactly what state of mind Cruel was in when he came to speak with him. Then we see that Cruel had actually asked Stave to sponsor him. Standing before him, Stave saw a man who had lost both his family and home at the hands of his younger brother. Cruel swore that if Stave became his patron, he would be the finest sword Stave could ever wield. Stave knew there were other ways for the man to survive and other paths he could follow. But he agreed, saying he wasn't foolish enough to cast aside a dog eager to serve a master. Still, he wanted to know why Cruel made that request. Cruel answered that this time he wanted to be the protector. Stave admitted he had never understood why Cruel wanted that role. But now he realizes Cruel isn't protecting someone else. He's trying to protect himself. Is he afraid of Diem? Cruel lowers his head and says yes. And Stave says they are both following the same path, eliminating the Emperor's dog. With a hand over his chest, Stave thinks this is absolutely crucial. The tightness in his heart tells him that man threatens everything. He swears that one day he will kill him. Outside the carriage, Lane asks if Diem needs help, but he says he's fine. That is, until he looks ahead and sees the entire entrance to his home destroyed and burning. On top of that, why are the Death Knights there too? He imagines it must be a dream or some kind of hallucination. His stress has reached its breaking point. But reality quickly sets in when he feels the heat against his skin, and he demands to know what disaster is happening. Soldiers call him captain, but another corrects them, saying he's an honorary count now. They can't call him captain anymore. He's about to ask why the place is such a mess when a bomb suddenly falls straight into his hand. Completely confused, he hears Lion warn him to be careful. He throws it aside, and it explodes elsewhere in the garden. He demands to know why these damn bastards are doing this. Lane asks if he's all right. The soldiers are all worried, and someone comes walking out of the flames. A man emerges from the fire and says the cursed one truly is a hero. He caught Dion off guard, yet Dion threw the bomb to the perfect spot and killed him instantly. The soldiers are amazed that he had already arrived and killed one of them, while the protagonist hadn't even noticed the intruders. That's when he realizes the Revolutionary Army has launched another attack. His comrades explain that those men came to destroy his home, so they rushed over to stop them. The protagonist, however, wants to know why everyone else is there. The soldiers are confused. Hadn't they just explained it? But Diane is convinced that if they're running around following him, they must have caused trouble and lost their positions. The men seem touched, saying the captain truly cares about them. Sure, they had issues, but nothing serious enough to get them expelled. He tells them to stop disrespecting him as he tries to move away. Honestly, this boy's life isn't easy. Wherever he goes, people keep bothering him. What he needs to focus on is that the army attacked not only his carriage, but also ambushed him at home. They are clearly determined to kill him. He notices one surviving member of the Revolutionary Army suddenly rise and try to escape. The protagonist needs information, so he must capture at least one of them. That's when the butler, remember, appears, slamming one man to the ground and lifting the other, saying they nearly got away. Clearly this is no ordinary butler. He tells Dion he's impressed, since he feared something terrible had happened after hearing about the carriage attack. He also asks whether anything happened at the palace, because Dion looks far more troubled than when he left. When Dion tries to answer, someone else cuts in, reminding everyone that the Revolutionary Army attacked them, so of course he's shaken. Finally, Remember tells him to go upstairs and rest, while Dion watches the captured man in the background. The prisoner swears that one day Dion Hart will die. Well, unless he's immortal, that's a vow anyone could make. 3 people stood in the way of removing the emperor from power: Commander Nemesius, Chancellor Ardle, and without question, Dion Hart, the spearhead of the army and the man who most influenced the 8-Year War. On top of that, everything he did was carried out in secret, making his movements impossible to predict. People claimed he went out to hunt monsters, but the prisoner knew it was always for some other mission. One of them starts saying Diem is nothing but the army's dog, but another man grabs him by the collar and tells him to shut up. It was because they fought against the emperor that everyone had to endure that war in the first place. The man tries to argue, but without further discussion, the other man draws a knife, says Diem needs to rest, and ends it right there. He's dead. Watching all this, Butler only thinks about how difficult today's cleanup will be. The next chapter opens in an empty, impoverished city. A starving girl remembers that she hasn't eaten anything since that day, but in that slum, crying won't put food on her plate. Just then, a friend appears and says he managed to get a piece of bread. It came from the Church of Salvation, which sometimes gives away water and a few other things for free. The girl insists that's impossible. There must be drugs in it or something wrong with it. He tells her to stop being ridiculous. The crippled man next door ate some and said he felt fine. She argues that the man would eat anything, even if it were drugged. He tells her to stop doubting everything. They gave it to him after he explained she'd been starving for a week. He tries to take it back when she refuses, but she snatches it away. Still, she wonders why anyone would give away food and water without asking for anything in return. The boy stands and declares that since she doesn't trust it, he'll go back and bring even more bread. In his mind, it doesn't matter if they poisoned it. Well, that's one way to die, right, kid? But anyway, the girl stands and calls out to Paul, then says she'll go with him. If what he said is true, people really are giving away food, then it's their only chance to survive. Back at the castle, a week has passed since Diem returned to the Empire. The place has already been restored, and now the Death Knights, whom he calls the Mad Dogs, will work with him for a while. It's unexpected, and he has no idea why. He planned to take advantage of his time in the human kingdom since the Emperor hadn't summoned him, but now he's buried in paperwork after being away so long. The protagonist demands to know which idiot approved this disastrous project that will waste so much time and money. Remember calmly answers that he did. Dion instantly changes his tone, calls it a brilliant idea, and approves it. Ever since he saw Remember kill those men, he decided it was best not to oppose him too much. Besides, it's better to let him handle these matters. Then he hears shouting and looks out the window. A fight breaks out. With the Mad Dogs, his white-clad troops, battling the same imperial soldiers who are always causing trouble. Our boy asks if these troublesome knights have nothing better to do. The butler explains that the emperor always gave them missions. But now that they're under Dean's command, and he hasn't assigned them anything, they've been training aimlessly and causing trouble. The protagonist doesn't want to command these men, but Remember tells him it's obvious he received them, because His Majesty cares deeply about him. The emperor would never risk placing such a powerful troop in a distant household, since that could easily lead to betrayal. This proved how much he trusted and valued Diem. But Diem is sure the emperor sent those bastards back, because he realized how impossible they were to manage. He also wants to know why there's so much paperwork to handle. He had handed the Heart territory over to the emperor a year ago. If that man truly cared about him, he should manage this land himself and leave Diem with nothing. That's when Remember reveals that Diane apparently didn't know, but His Majesty had officially named him the sole ruler of the Heart territory some time ago. The protagonist is shaken and demands to know why that cursed emperor did this. While Remember warns him that the official announcement should arrive soon, Diane immediately stands up. He wants a way to return this estate. When he first received the title of Count, he already wanted to refuse it, because he didn't want to serve as a margrave. According to the explanation, a margrave is basically a count whose land borders another country, but who is treated like a marquis. From what I understand, it just means you're stuck right beside the enemy. And the reason our protagonist doesn't want this land is obvious. He has no good memories of this place. In fact, his worst memories are tied to it. So he says he won't accept it. He'll speak with the emperor and return everything. But then, someone announces that the crown prince and General Nemesius are there to see him. Obviously, Dion has no idea why those two want to speak with him. Nemesius hates him, so why would he show up? The general stands in the middle of the room, staring at the strange painting, and wonders whether the boy truly wanted to bring that thing along when building his new mansion. Someone greets them, and Elpidus immediately apologizes for the sudden visit, says he needs a word with the count. We then go back a little earlier, when Alicia was upset after hearing that our boy's mansion had been attacked. At least he has a cute admirer here. But her brother tells her not to be so downhearted. She covers her face and says she knows he'll never want to see her again. All her hard work has gone to waste. She stands and tells her brother to admit she's beautiful. She knows she's a princess and can never make the first move. Maybe she isn't particularly talented, but she never wanted to cause trouble either. Clearly, she's trying to win Dion over. Elphidas tells her once again that it wasn't her fault, even though she really did hit the boy with full force. She says she'll apologize, and he asks whether she's planning to visit him. When she nods, he immediately says no. Normally, he lets her do whatever she wants, but this situation is completely different. Whether she visited him or he came to see her, it would spiral into a scandal. The eccentric girl replies that it would only make it easier for them to marry, but he cuts her off. He knows everyone sees her as innocent and foolish, and that's exactly the image she maintains. Then, with a darker look, she says that yes, she doesn't love him, but it would be easy to make him useful to everyone. Another twisted one. Can't they let the boy live peacefully? No wonder she's so messed up with two personalities. Elphidas warns her that if she acts so boldly, no one will believe she's a sweet, harmless princess anymore. If she wants to lose that title, he doesn't care. But she says no. She would rather do everything possible to avoid giving the nobles another reason to fight for the throne. Besides, all the effort she put into winning over the count wasn't wasted. She made her intentions clear, and now everyone knows, meaning no other girl will try to approach him. If that's what it takes to keep someone as talented as him loyal to the emperor, she accepts it. Her brother strokes her head and says she's a thoughtful girl. He knows she has reasons for everything she does, but he's told her countless times that she can stop whenever she wants. Although she smiles sweetly and says she understands, it's obvious she's hiding something darker. She then asks her brother to find out what Dion thinks of her, because she doesn't want the Empire's treasure to remain angry over what she did. And now we're back at the meeting. Clearly, it isn't the most important thing in the world, but he needed to ensure the boy remained on the Emperor's side. Meanwhile, the protagonist wonders what the hell those two are doing there. We see that he welcomed them politely, and Elphidas says it was fine and told him to sit down. Our boy immediately asked why they had come, and the blonde man said he had something to discuss, as did the general, but it wouldn't take long. The two exchanged glares, and our protagonist didn't look pleased. That lunatic was staring at him, as if he could burn a hole through him. But our boy knew that whenever the prince said it wasn't a big deal, it always meant trouble. Elphidas then mentioned the incident at the celebration, when Aletia had crossed the line with him. He remembered coughing up blood, said it was fine, and the man thanked him for not taking it as an insult. Although the moment caught the protagonist off guard, he knew she was expressing affection in her own way, so he didn't mind much. That's when Elphidius said he had a personal favor to ask. Protagonist hesitated, and the man continued. If it was all right, he wanted the two of them to become friends. Poor protagonist. The guy approaches him with the fakest smile, and our boy is too soft-hearted. He said he wanted to get to know Lord Dean better, but since he was so busy, they rarely had a chance to meet. The protagonist was confused, wondering if that was truly why he'd come. Elphidius replied that being crown prince meant there were many things he couldn't do, including visiting someone he wanted to call a friend. That was why he'd used the celebration incident as an excuse to come and talk. He's playing the whole cute and friendly act, but deep down, he's a bastard. Dianson said he was extremely grateful for the offer, but before he could finish, the general was already giving him a piercing stare. So he replied that it would be an honor to become friends with the great prince. Elphidius immediately lit up, saying they were friends now and would grow closer. He was overjoyed. Dian, however, wasn't exactly thrilled. Obviously, Elphidius wasn't an idiot and could tell the boy was uncomfortable. He had probably accepted only out of sympathy, just as the rumors said, so he took advantage of that, and quickly added that he'd visit soon, so they could train together and then have tea. The protagonist was about to refuse, but the prince stood up, saying he had plenty to do and the matter was settled. Goodbye. Then he left, excited to see his new friend again soon. The protagonist, however, didn't want to be left alone in the room with Nemesius, who addressed him as Honorary Count Dion Hart, and said it had been a while since they'd spoken alone. The protagonist was about to reply, but Nemesius cut him off, saying he'd get straight to the point so he could leave. The emperor wanted him to hand over the revolutionary soldier he had captured. The goal was to locate their base and wipe them out once and for all, but since Diem and his troops had captured him, he had the right to refuse. The protagonist mentally thanked him for getting straight to the point and said he didn't care. He could take the man and proceed. Then, they brought a prisoner out in front of his cell. The protagonist pointed at him and said that was the one. But Nemesius said he'd heard that 3 people attacked Diem. One died in an explosion, but the death of another had never been confirmed. The protagonist asked why he was bringing that up. Nemesius told him to explain how the last one died. Nemesius then reflected that he never hated anyone without reason. During the 8-year war, he'd witnessed the drastic change in Diane's personality firsthand. The boy had been the first noble to become an ordinary soldier, so it was impossible not to notice him. At first he was fragile and barely survived the early battles, but eventually he adopted cruelty as his means of survival. He began killing every enemy in brutal ways, and that was surely one reason he was eventually driven insane. He puts his hands on the boy's shoulders, tells him to stand, and says he's been there for 3 days already. It wasn't his fault that he did whatever was necessary to survive, but he had to accept the consequences. Nemesius realized that guilt was eating away at the child, little by little, battle after battle. But then the boy raises his face and asks what he's even talking about. Right then, the general noticed something unusual about him, a divided nature or another personality. David says his wounds are fine, but the general wants to discuss the battle. But Diane looks him straight in the eye again and says he truly has no idea what he's talking about. Nemesius realized he had a bloodthirsty personality concerned only with survival, and another normal one that always forgot the horrors he'd committed. DM has that sinister look, and we already know that when those dark circles appear beneath his eyes, he's clearly possessed. Even so, he says he's too tired to remember what happened. Still, he was lucky to survive without killing anyone. To the general, the boy couldn't bear the weight of his own actions, and escaped their consequences in the most extreme and terrible way possible. Back in the present, he asks whether Diem remembers how the man died, while wondering how long he'll continue pretending not to know. Diem then asks what he means by remember. The general thinks that perhaps things might change if he began taking responsibility. But Diem says that, unfortunately, he wasn't there and doesn't know the details. It seems some dogs attacked him. The man immediately realizes he was foolish to think anything would be different. So he says he's leaving and there's no need to escort him. Obviously he knows the entire dog attack story is ridiculous. He has no doubt Diem killed the soldier and probably used that strange personality of his to conveniently do whatever he wanted. Weakness in someone with great responsibility was catastrophic. To him, the boy was an absolute threat. So why did His Majesty keep him close? Not just him, but even the Demon King seemed to know. There are so many pieces moving here, and I'm trying to connect them. Then the protagonist returns, saying he must have dozed off. He asks how long he was unconscious, and Remember says it wasn't long, but asks whether the boy feels better, because he was truly worried when he fainted. Even though his body is naturally fragile, it's dangerous for him to keep putting himself under so much stress. The protagonist says he's fine and only needs some rest. Then Remember suggests sending those crazy mutts on a monster hunt. The protagonist thinks that isn't a bad idea, since those men have been causing endless trouble. Remember mentions some monsters roaming near the borders, making it the perfect opportunity. Our boy smiles and agrees, secretly delighted. Getting those men away from him would be perfect. Leanne is already waving goodbye, saying they'll meet again at the border. Oh no, I thought he'd remain in the castle, but in the end he was sent along too. Actually, she's saying they're already arriving at the border. Our boy asks why he has to be there too, and they answer that he obviously shouldn't miss the fun of the hunt. But the protagonist wonders who in their right mind would miss seeing blood. He did everything possible to avoid going, but they clung to his leg and begged him. Everyone said he couldn't let them have all the fun. They promised to help him get as many kills as possible. Our boy tried to say he had business at the castle, but Remember appeared and told him not to worry. He'd handle everything as usual, and DM could simply relax for the week. The soldiers became emotional over his kindness, while our boy wanted to shout, "Remember, you bastard, I don't want to go." But then the butler explained that if he went, those rats would probably follow them anyway. This way, it would be easier to kill whoever was coming after. In other words, it was the perfect vacation and solved one of his problems at the same time. Considering everything happening, he couldn't really refuse. Besides, if he stayed behind while everyone hunted him, there was a real chance he'd actually die. Then one of the soldiers told him to cheer up, saying he'd heard DM return from the last hunt with a huge grin. DM, however, thinks he only smiled because he'd been relaxing with the demons. Now a group of orcs and shamans is already appearing, and the soldiers are excited, saying it's time to get to work. The protagonist, meanwhile, is already missing the demon realm. Then he notices the beautiful woman of the household sighing, and realizes that even she's tired of this. When he requested someone to control the Death Knights, she was the first person appointed. Unlike these lunatics, she embodies everything a warrior should be. She asks whether he plans to join them, but he says he'll let them enjoy themselves for now. He's content to remain calm, while the men argue over who has killed the most. They keep offering targets to our boy, but he tells them to continue enjoying themselves. He has a feeling that if he joins in, something will go wrong. But suddenly, he senses something and then bam, an arrow strikes him directly in the shoulder. Leon screams his name, but all he can think is that if he hadn't turned his head, the arrow would have pierced his neck. But who would launch such an insane ambush? Unless someone wanted to start a war with the Empire, nobody would dare. It had to be an assassin from another faction that wanted him dead. Hidden among the bushes, a man draws another arrow and wonders how DM managed to dodge. At that point, Dion says he's tired of these people. He tells her to cut the arrow, and she obeys immediately. She knows that any movement he makes will cause unbearable pain and drive the arrowhead deeper into his arm. The protagonist simply calls for the dogs and orders everyone to use the drugs. From above, someone watches the battle and asks whether the person below is the Empire's hero, Dion Hart. Another man beside him confirms that he's the white-haired boy commanding everyone. The man looked worried, wondering whether this is some kind of internal conflict. But after seeing him injured, he says it's been 2 years since the 8-Year War. The infamous Dion Hart had been wounded, and the Empire surely wouldn't want another war right now. All they had to do was finish them off and claim they were attacked without provocation. They might even receive compensation. Down below, however, the men are swallowing some kind of pill, and Leanne asks what it is. He tells her it's the drug that freezes your reason, and she says it's dangerous and has been banned. But Diane, who cuts through everyone, clearly doesn't care about that. The men hiding nearby raise their swords and charge into battle, but Diane simply jumps from his horse and says, "There goes the first one." In an instant, the man's body is drenched in blood. He warns the man to stay still unless he wants both legs cut off. Then he tells the army that one has been captured, and the rest can now be killed. With that, the entire troop advances, completely wiping out the enemy. He tells Leon to watch the fallen man and prevent him from escaping. But at that moment, he sees some soldiers hesitating to deliver the final blow. The others were already dead, and this one looked as though he would die anyway. But then Dia steps forward, slashes the man about 50 times, and says they've spent 8 years fighting like dogs. So why do they suddenly believe they can return to being human? In reality, they were still pathetic and had no chance of surviving. It had taught them countless times that they could never show mercy. Everything they did was for the sake of survival. The attackers realized they had made a terrible mistake. They were definitely torn apart because the scene then shifts to Cruel. The butler asks why he offered half the reward merely for wounding him. The Duke had made his intentions perfectly clear. Cruel answers that he knows the intention was to kill him. He only added one condition, so it's fine. The butler insists that Diane had to be killed, so why did Cruel spend their money on such a condition? Cruel answers that he'll take responsibility, so there's nothing to worry about. The man wonders why the person who should hate Dion more than anyone is behaving this way. It makes no sense. Meanwhile, Cruel thinks that if anyone is going to decide that boy's end, it will be him. In other words, he's protecting Dion because he wants to kill him himself. Apparently, the Count made an offer, and Cruel secretly arranged to receive half the reward merely for causing an injury. Back on the battlefield, the protagonist is cutting everyone down. Someone nearby says it's the worst scene he has ever witnessed. The red-eyed man looked nothing like a hero of the Empire. That wasn't what they were being paid for. Now we understand why that group of knights had earned their name. It was clear they weren't human, but demons. Honestly, in this story, the demons are the good guys. Then Dion approaches and asks whether the man is desperate for money, stupid, or both, as he drives in a knife, and stomps on him. He says he doesn't enjoy torturing people for hours, so the man should simply reveal who sent him, and they can settle everything. The scene shifts to someone informing the Emperor that the Kingdom of Arian has filed a complaint because Dion's troops were hunting near their border. Apparently, the troops they encountered were forced to retaliate, and now the kingdom claims it was a military invasion. The Emperor, however, only asks whether the boy was ambushed and if he's alright. The man explains that he's alive, but took an arrow to the shoulder and won't be able to fight properly for a month. The Emperor asks whether those bastards are demanding compensation, and the man says yes. He understands immediately. They believe that because they injured Dion, the Empire won't dare start a war. It's a shame they're as stupid as they are weak. Apparently he has been too lenient in recent years. The informant desperately says they can simply claim the other side orchestrated the ambush instead of starting a war, but Eduardo orders them to prepare for war. Naturally, the two men are startled and beg him to reconsider. It has only been 2 years since the 8-year war ended. Nobody wants to fight again, and they're broke. But the Emperor says conquest will bring money. If they fought for 8 years before, there's no reason they can't do it again. The Chancellor says the troops aren't ready and the people won't accept this. But the Emperor simply reminds them that he's a tyrant. He had already planned to conquer the rest of the continent, and the timing is perfect. The moment he killed all his brothers and sisters, he already decided to follow this path. He refuses to turn back, even though that decision has now become a shackle. That chain is now calling for another catastrophe. The Chancellor stands there, thinking there's nothing wrong with fulfilling the responsibilities one has chosen, but this man's priorities are clearly pathetic. All he can do is pray that if those catastrophes truly occur, the Empire won't suffer. The Chancellor leaves, and the Emperor immediately asks Nemesius whether he knows about the Church of Salvation. The man asks whether that's the cult that has recently gained an absurd number of followers from the slums. He understands why. During difficult times, it's only natural for people in this country to rely on religion. The Emperor agrees, but says the group has grown far too powerful. It would be best to eliminate that influence before the war begins. He wonders whether putting Dion in charge of dealing with it would be suitable punishment for the trouble he caused. Even with his injured arm, destroying the cult should be easy. But Nemesius immediately refuses, saying the boy is far too dangerous. Eduardo asks whether he hates Dion so much because of his unnecessary brutality. Nemesius answers that isn't even the problem, it's the way he tries to survive. The boy has 2 personalities, and his mental strength is as fragile as a sandcastle. The worst thing they could do is place him in a situation where he might break completely. But the Emperor only laughs, and says he already knows that very well. Naturally, the commander asks why he would do it anyway. The Emperor replies that it's Dian's responsibility. If he does something, he'll also be responsible for the consequences. Nemesius insists that a broken sword eventually wounds its master. The Emperor shares responsibility for whatever the boy does. But Eduardo doesn't care and says none of that matters. This is simply part of an emperor's life, and he tells the man to stop, because he's said enough. He has already accepted the role of a tyrant, but occasionally he is a good leader to those he favors. That's the only reason he's overlooking this insolence. He won't punish one of his subordinates over something so trivial. Nemesius clearly senses the threat and apologizes. Then the Emperor tells him to relax. He wouldn't keep someone so dangerous by his side without a good reason. After that, we see the past, when Diem asked permission to wipe out his family. At that moment, the Emperor clearly felt the boy's hatred and rage. He possessed extraordinary talent, yet had been thrown into war at 14 years old without knowing anything, and had spent 8 years fighting. The moment he returned from the battlefield, after everything he'd endured, that was his very first request. The Emperor replied that the hearts hated him for taking the throne by force, so he had no reason to refuse. But he asked whether the boy believed he was strong enough to bring down such a prestigious family. At that moment, the Emperor decided to use him as a sword that still needed to be forged. Dion only asked what he needed to do. That's when Eduardo mentioned that the hero was leaving on a mission to kill the Demon King and asked why Dion didn't join him. To him, the plan was perfect, and with the warrior's death, it became a success. Dion returned with the man's body, and the Emperor praised his splendid work. He asked whether Diane had changed his mind, but he said he hadn't. In the end, the Emperor couldn't deny that Diane was a hero, even without the so-called fragment. At that moment, he remarked that the Heart Mansion might not remain quiet that night. And yes, the protagonist simply thanked him. That was how the cruelty began. But the story says, fate is mysterious, and when Cruel returned later that night, he found Dion standing amid everyone he had killed in the mansion. And worst of all, Cruel survived. The Emperor remarks that Cruel ultimately became an excellent way to keep Dion under control. That way, Dion killed the family without the Emperor ever ordering it, he merely authorized it. But Cruel remained alive, and if Dion wanted to kill his older brother, he would need the Emperor's help. Meanwhile, Cruel works for that Duke because it's his only means of survival. They have become each other's leash. As long as Cruel remains alive, Dion will stay by his side. Honestly, I think the boy will kill you too before long, but whatever. In the next chapter, our boy is surrounded by bodies pulling at him from every side, and he wonders what this is. A voice tells him to surrender to the madness, saying everything they do is for survival. The protagonist covers his ears and tries to calm himself, but then a shadow approaches from behind, covers his face, and tells him not to think about it. He had to accept that his family ignored him, even though he was always there. Suddenly he wakes and wonders whether it was just another one of those dreams. His arm is still injured, and he remembers being struck by the arrow. The problem is that he doesn't remember much of what happened afterward at the border. One of the soldiers says they've arrived at the mansion, and he steps down. I still find it funny. This is one of the few stories where the protagonist leaves, goes somewhere, and returns within 1 or 2 chapters. In other stories, characters leave and don't return for 10 chapters. Now DM thinks that without that strange dream, he'd believe nothing happened. His shoulder is still injured. Then he asks for Remember, who appears immediately, and says no one expected a spy to have been there all along. One man was about to fall, tried to say something, and was stabbed just like that, dying on the spot. Remember says they'll now work on behalf of the dead. Someone comes to remove the body and warns that Diane has returned. Remember says fine, he'll receive the boy, and orders them to discover who that man was working for. Wait, but the man is dead. Are they extracting information from corpses now? How are they supposed to figure that out? Then we see Remember speaking with our boy, noticing his injury and asking if he's alright. The protagonist says it isn't a serious problem, and Remember says he knows DM fights with his right hand, so naturally he'll still be able to fight. Then he mentions the strange smell, because he'd just killed one of the spies and his body was covered in blood. He tried to capture him alive, but there was a small incident. Sure, even Remember is no good. He's pretending it was a minor accident when the man was clearly pinned to the ground. The boy truly gets no peace anywhere he goes, my god. Then the butler asks if he discovered who attacked him, and Dion says everyone died before he could find out. Besides, he doesn't remember anything anyway. The butler says that judging by the situation, whoever is behind this shouldn't be underestimated. On top of that, he believes the Duke of Leicester is one of the most likely culprits. Wait, now he's offering information that actually sounds logical. I'm confused. Either way, Dion can't handle this alone, so it would be best to ask His Majesty for help. As soon as he says that, he apologizes for interfering too much. Dion says it's fine, while thinking that he already planned to visit the Emperor and discuss returning the territory he never wanted. His plan is to settle everything quickly and finally live the peaceful life he has dreamed of for so long. But when our boy arrives, he learns that the Duke of Leicester, yes, that bastard Stave, is meeting with His Majesty. He says it's fine, but he's clearly confused. He came specifically to discuss this man, so why is he here? Right then, that fake Alicia appears with her foolishly emotional face and calls out to our boy. Her brother restrains her and greets his friend, and our boy returns the greeting. The shameless one immediately starts boasting that they're friends. I'd like to believe this man is good, but I obviously don't trust him. Everyone in this story is rotten. Then Elpidus says they can wait together to speak with His Majesty. Suddenly they're all sitting at a table, with that clingy girl hanging from his arm. Get off him, woman. The protagonist isn't pleased at all. Had he known he'd encounter those two, he never would have come. Then the prince mentions that DM drinks plenty of tea and offers to bring him some when he leaves. DM says it isn't necessary, but then Alicia shoves a cookie into his mouth. Forceful girl, huh? The prince also tells him to be more careful. He heard Diane went on that hunt and pushed his body too far. The protagonist says he's fine, and Elpidus tells him to take better care of himself. He doesn't want to become emperor, so the current one needs to remain alive for a long time. Deep down, the protagonist is choking, because his plan is to stop serving this man and disappear from this place as soon as possible. Elpidus explains that if he inherits the throne, it means something happened to Eduardo, which is why he has no intention of taking it. As DM must know, His Majesty is like a brother to them, and they want him to be happy. Wait, what? I thought you were his children. You're all equally thick-headed liars. Now the protagonist clarifies it. It's impressive how deeply the prince and princess adore their uncle, the emperor. Then Diane explains how strange that is, because the current emperor was once the 9th prince. He didn't just kill his brothers. He killed his parents, their children, his cousins' siblings, and nearly everyone else. But he spared those two, and even more strangely, they genuinely like and care about him. He then speaks about the first prince, who was Elphidas and Alicia's father. Unlike the rest of the royal family, he was good-natured and decent. He cared for the 9th prince alongside his own children until the day he died. So perhaps he forgave him, since they were practically brothers because his father raised that bastard. What a beautiful family. It's hard to believe they would later massacre everyone. Dion says that if the first prince had lived, the 9th prince might never have resorted to such violence. Then Elphidas holds that fake girl's hand and tells our boy they're counting on him, while she asks him not to place too much pressure on Diem. The protagonist simply says he's going to the bathroom and leaves. Fake number 1 remarks that he ran away, and fake number 2 agrees. Clearly the conversation was too much for him. Elphidas feels bad because he was sincere. He knows that no matter how calm the emperor appears, a sword is still pointed at his throat. We hear someone shouting that at this rate, that man will remain on the throne forever. They need to resolve this quickly because most nobles are exhausted, and justice must be served. For 2 years, remarks like these have been directed at Elphidas. He ignores them, but they're clearly growing into a threat. Right then, Alicia says the emperor needs someone completely loyal to him. Dion is extraordinarily talented, so having him nearby is a blessing. That's why she's working so hard to seduce him. Like the fine print in a contract, she adds that she genuinely likes him too. Really? I don't believe it. Elphidas says it would be perfect if Diane became a beast completely loyal to his majesty, to the point where he wouldn't hesitate to kill any noble who raised a sword against the emperor. Honestly, hesitation doesn't seem to be Diane's problem. Our silver-haired man wanders through the castle searching for the bathroom when someone suddenly opens a door. He recognizes the startled man. He approaches, wondering why the man looks so frightened, and asks whether he happens to know where they are. The man suddenly draws a sword and attacks him without warning. The protagonist raises his arm and takes a cut, while still trying to understand why this lunatic is attacking him when all he wants are directions to the bathroom. It turns out the man had been stealing documents, and believed the protagonist had caught him red-handed. What he can't believe is that he was unlucky enough to encounter Dion Hart of all people. Then someone grabs the man by the neck and lifts him into the air. Yes, it's cruel. Could this be an Itachi-like situation? Maybe they killed their parents to survive, and then Dion helped the Demon King while Cruel helped the Emperor. Could this be some kind of 4D chess? The thought just crossed my mind. The protagonist asks what Cruel is doing there, and Cruel glares back, demanding to know the same thing. After noticing his injured arm, Cruel chokes the man even harder while he begs not to be strangled. Several sheets of paper fall to the floor, and when Dean bends down to pick them up, that bastard Duke, Stave, appears and takes a look. He comments that they appear to be very important documents. He asks whether Dean came to see the Emperor, and the protagonist says yes, he only needs a brief conversation. Stave, with that crooked gaze, says the boy managed to catch an infiltrator. Surely His Majesty will grant any request he makes. After all, although Cruel had lifted the man, he was certain the boy could have handled him alone. At that moment, the group of blockheads arrives, worriedly calling Dion's name. Elphidas immediately grabs him and asks why he's bleeding, as usual, from both his nose and shoulder, while everyone calls for a doctor. Cruel says it must be from the fight, and Stave agrees, suggesting the spy's weapon was probably poisoned. The protagonist, however, doesn't want anyone to realize that his body is simply incredibly weak. But then a man comes running in desperately, saying he heard there was a patient. The moment he sees Dion Hart's face, however, he panics. Every time he treats this boy, the nobles stare at him as though they'll kill him if he makes a single mistake. Elphidas immediately asks about poison, but the doctor says it's merely a shallow dagger wound. The prince grabs him and orders him to examine Diem properly, because he's coughing up blood. Clearly, it isn't just a scratch. Then someone else appears and says it's the Demon King's curse. Nemesius enters and everyone greets him. So apparently everyone knew Diem visited the Demon King, or at least everyone in the castle did. And in his memory, Nemesius had already said he was there to take Diem to the Emperor. The protagonist, simply wanting to escape the scene, says he can't keep that man waiting and leaves, thanking everyone for their concern. Watching him walk away so casually and without concern makes Elphidas believe he doesn't care about the demonic marks, since they're incurable anyway. He truly is a resilient boy who keeps everything bottled up inside. At least that part is genuinely true. Outside, Stave enters his carriage. And the worst part is that the paper he saw contained plans for the war the emperor intended to start. He never imagined this mad emperor would immediately begin another war. He truly was losing control. Stave decides to help this part of the plan along, ensuring he can also gain what he wants from it. Then the emperor praises Dion for catching the spy and asks whether he was injured, and Dion says he wasn't. But the emperor points out that he's sweating heavily. He reminds him that as one of the empire's most valuable assets, he doesn't need to hide how he feels. The protagonist says he'll remember that. In reality, he's sweating cold because he hasn't said a word since taking that heavy blow. The truth is, he desperately needs the bathroom and still hasn't managed to go. The emperor then asks why he came, and as soon as Dion mentions the heart territory, the emperor cuts him off, saying that if he wants to return it, the answer is no. The protagonist is confused. He hasn't even explained himself yet. When he tries to mention returning the army, the emperor says no again. He will keep the troops and the castle, and neither will be returned to the emperor. But if Dion completes a small task, the emperor can guarantee him another request. On a document, Dion sees information about the Church of Salvation. The emperor explains that it's a rapidly growing cult and wants Dion to deal with it. The protagonist seems uninterested until the emperor says he'll simply give the assignment to Cruel instead, allowing him to earn the wish. At that, Dion stands and says he'll do it. He realizes this damned emperor always uses Cruel as leverage to force him into things he doesn't want. But then the emperor adds that both Dion and Cruel will take the assignment, and whoever finishes first will receive the wish. It will be a competition. Dion stands with a deadly serious expression and says the task will be completed sooner than expected. There is no way he'll lose to that bastard Cruel. And yes, I suppose my 4D chess theory was completely wrong. Forget it. Sometime later our boy is drinking tea, saying it has tasted the same lately, because Remember tells him the prince personally sent it after hearing how much Diem liked it. On top of that, he has to take the awful medicine prescribed by the doctor. They're in the middle of that conversation when Leanne walks in, and the protagonist asks whether she has finished investigating the Church of Salvation. She hands him a report, explaining that they distribute free bread and water without demanding anything in return. Unlike other cults, this one doesn't blindly worship a single leader. They only ask people to believe that salvation is coming. The protagonist finds that even stranger. Giving away food like that isn't cheap, and they would need support from nobles to sustain it. But these people don't want money, and they don't even have a religious leader. So what exactly are they trying to achieve? After drinking tea non-stop, he stands to use the bathroom, but Leanne immediately asks whether he plans to handle the matter personally. She tells him directly that it will be extremely dangerous and insists they go together. The poor man has no idea what she's talking about. But suddenly they're already standing in front of what is supposedly the Church of Salvation. She produces an outfit and tells him to disguise himself, because things will become dangerous from this point onward. The protagonist can't believe that once again, he only wanted to use the bathroom and somehow got dragged somewhere else. He tells her he has something to do and warns her not to follow him. Apparently, he simply wants to relieve himself in the alley. But naturally, someone keeps following him. When the woman tries to sneak up behind him, he vanishes before her eyes. That allows him to relieve himself in the alley. When he calmly emerges, he notices someone nearby. It's Cruel. When Cruel turns to look back, Diem is startled and coughs up blood, lowering his head. At first I thought his brother hadn't noticed, but he immediately attacks, and Diem blocks him. Cruel remarks that an injured arm isn't enough to stop him. Diem assumes he's referring to the cut from the castle, but then Cruel grabs his other shoulder, squeezes it, and forces him backward. Right then, the protagonist wonders how the hell Cruel knows about the arrow wound. Cruel says that if Diem can still move this freely while injured, then the job clearly wasn't done properly. That's when Diem realizes this man ordered the attempt on his life. But at that moment, Leanne appears behind them in the alley, and the protagonist grabs her and pulls her away. She's more concerned about him coughing up blood, while Cruel recognizes her as the captain of Diem's knights. Diem shields her and tells her to stay back. He might be able to fight Cruel without causing a serious incident, but if she attacks the famous hero, things will become complicated. Then Cruel asks whether he intends to infiltrate the Church of Salvation. Diem walks past him, saying he doesn't have to answer, but his brother warns that he'll be in danger if he investigates too deeply. Naturally, Diem wonders why the man who ordered his assassination is suddenly concerned for his safety. He truly is such a gentle brother. Sometime later, while looking at a document, Cruel says that if Diem's days are truly numbered, he should be more concerned with living peacefully. The boy already has a weak body, and the Demon King's curse continues to consume him. Surely he doesn't have much time left. Wait, now my 4D chess theory actually makes sense. Remember when Cruel tried to save him? I'm not so sure anymore. Then we see the protagonist smearing mud all over his face. saying no one can discover that they're nobles. Leon hesitates because the smell is terrible, and Diane already expected that since she was born into nobility. Now that she's the one suffering, he says there is no way the commander will abandon him, not after she promised to remain by his side forever. So she scoops filth from the ground and smears it over her face as well. Their plan is to become dirty enough to resemble poor people seeking help from the church. And Diem remembers Cruel telling him to rub mud into his hair too. Damn it, none of this makes sense. Diem tells her to conceal her sword and follow him since he'll enter first. Standing in front of the building, he sees a green-haired woman who seems vaguely familiar. The protagonist approaches her, but then trips like a complete idiot and falls face first onto the ground. The woman asks whether he's all right and helps him up, saying he must be so hungry that he lacks the strength to stand. His hand is already covered in blood from his constant coughing, and they ultimately help him inside. From a distance, however, he gives Leanne a thumbs up, and she realizes his plan worked perfectly. He truly resembles an exhausted beggar. When she tries to enter, the woman at the entrance says they aren't accepting anyone else that day. She gives her bread and water, tells her to eat, and asks her to return another time. Leanne is about to ask her to wait, but it's already too late. The woman has noticed her refined presence and the calm, graceful way she moves. She's clearly some kind of noble or knight sent there. Fortunately, our boy tripped like a fool, because the man inside looks so meek and thin that he seems not to have eaten in days. The woman brings him a cup of tea, convinced he couldn't have come from anywhere but the slums. He thanks her, and she says she'll get him some food. Meanwhile, Dion wonders why he hasn't found anything suspicious yet. The place looks like an ordinary temple. The people seem happy, and the guards resemble ideal paladins. But the fact that everything is so clean is the most suspicious detail of all. Then someone asks whether he isn't too warm, and he says no, he prefers keeping his cloak on. She immediately says that's even more reason to remove it, and pulls down his hood, revealing his cursed white hair and red eyes. The woman seems startled, but touches his face and comments on his red eyes. Strangely enough, he turns it into a little romantic moment, saying he knew she wouldn't like them because they were so ugly. Not even his family liked them, so naturally strangers would react the same way. She awkwardly says they aren't ugly. Then she asks whether he's heard of Dion Hart, another person from the Empire with similar eyes. Pretending ignorance, he asks whether that isn't the Empire's hero. She says yes, but warns him to be careful. That boy is more like a bloodthirsty vampire than a hero. He thinks his reputation clearly isn't doing very well. She then asks whether he knows what kind of place this is, and he answers that he only knows they distribute bread and water. She confirms that it's the Church of Salvation, a religious organization created to save those suffering because of Eduardo. The Emperor is the reason everyone lives so miserably. If he were a good person, nobody would suffer like this. The protagonist realizes they're insulting the Emperor here, and she even says he wouldn't have tripped in those muddy streets if the Emperor had repaired and cleaned them. But she reassures him that the Church of Salvation is different from all other organizations. They don't believe in money, they believe only in salvation itself. To DM, that makes everything even more confusing. It sounds admirable, but there must be a hidden motive. So he asks that if he becomes a believer, who exactly will save him? It's time to uncover the truth, but she only says he'll learn once he becomes one of them. Now he walks through the church, still unable to find any actual evidence. The food doesn't seem poisoned, and everyone appears calm and healthy. Then someone suddenly taps him on the back, and when he turns around, it's a sweet little girl. Doesn't she look like the one we saw with her brother at the very beginning? She asks whether he's new, and he says yes, noticing how cheerful and healthy she looks. She introduces herself as Thea and says he must have endured a difficult life to end up there, but he no longer needs to worry. This place provides food and drink without asking for anything in return. He thanks her, gently pats her head, and says this truly is salvation, while noticing several guards watching his every move. Then a boy in the corner calls to Thea, telling her to hurry and pray, and the protagonist immediately notices the suspicious boy glaring at him as if he wants to kill him. The two children leave, while Dion tries to figure out how to move without being noticed by the guards. But just then, someone calls out to him from outside. Leon hears strange noises. She is looking for a way to sneak in through the back, but isn't having any success. Then she sees several loaves of bread rolling across the ground, and hears someone calling for security. She approaches and sees the green-haired woman, saying they have an intruder. If it weren't a hero, everyone there would be held responsible and replaced. At that moment, Leon thinks it might be Dion, but perhaps it's Cruel. Then someone begins tearing through the building. It turns out to be Leon herself, who has rushed inside and is demanding to know where her lord is. The protagonist remains hidden in a corner. For a moment, he thinks he's about to be discovered, But fortunately, someone else draws everyone's attention. A man even offers him more bread. He was the one who threw it through the window, where she found it outside earlier. After that, DM wanders into the prayer area. When he pulls aside a curtain and looks through, the priest is standing with the green-haired woman. Naturally, they immediately ask what's happening, but he has already vanished, and all they see is the open window. The priest orders them to clean everything quickly and ensure nobody infiltrates the building. The woman, however, appears to notice something suspicious. Behind the curtain, Cruel suddenly grabs our boy. Get off him, for God's sake. The protagonist wonders why he has to encounter this bastard yet again. Still, both men focus on the green-haired woman, who says it's time to pray for salvation. Everyone there who believes is destined to follow the correct path. But instead of leading them in prayer, she wants to explain what true salvation really means. The crowd grows excited and thanks her. She explains that they will enter a room where only true believers may listen. She presses her hand against the wall, and her arm passes directly through it. She says that although it looks solid, they can walk through. And she tells everyone to pass through the portal, and naturally they realize it's some kind of magic. The two children happily skip through as well, and soon the entire group has passed through. Clearly this church is hiding something, because they're going far too far to conceal their activities. At that point, DM pulls himself free from Cruel honestly. He's starting to miss that fake Princess Aledia. They argue briefly. A moment later, both are touching the wall and trying to determine how to pass through. The protagonist feels a jewel behind it and realizes some kind of special magic is involved. This power was something humans learned during the war against the demons. But unlike demons, humans couldn't use special magic easily, so they stored it inside crystals like this, making the situation even more suspicious. Why does this church possess such advanced magic? The protagonist is already tempted to abandon the mission, but doing so would mean Cruel receives the wish. Just then, someone bursts through the door and announces a problem, and Diane quickly hides. The man rushes past, saying he must inform Selin immediately. He runs to the jewel, calls her name, and warns that there's an intruder tearing through the building and shouting for her lord. The protagonist has no idea what's happening, but then something on the man's back shatters again. Leanne arrives, demanding to know where her lord is. She grabs the man and demands to know who exactly his lord is supposed to be. At that moment, Leanne thinks she can't reveal which side she belongs to, but she also can't say count or hero, because that would make things too obvious. So she simply says that her lord is her lord. The man presses her for a name, saying it would help him locate the person if she identified him. Naturally, she continues hesitating. Aldine notices that the connection through the crystal is still active. On the other side, Selin is listening, and the moment she hears the voice, she recognizes it. It belongs to the suspicious woman who was at the gate earlier, and now she's here asking about her lord. Not to mention that a strange, red-eyed person was inside the building. She was now certain it was Dion Hart himself. She had expected the Emperor to assign him the mission too, but never imagined he would show up alone. Meanwhile, as we already suspected, Cruel was calmly talking with Selin and asking how she had gotten inside. He needed to know she wouldn't help him, especially since she knew he was there for a test ordered by the Duke, and besides, he had already obtained the most crucial information. I remembered where I'd seen her before, standing beside Stave, which meant Cruel had only been playing around there. She left the room, saying she would do him a favor since they served the same master. But she also said she would tighten security to ensure Dion Hart couldn't get inside. What she never expected was for the boy to casually walk through the front door. She returned to the pulpit and apologized for the interruption, then said it was time to resume the prayers. At the same time, she prayed that cursed Dion Hart wouldn't enter and ruin their work. Everything had to proceed according to that person's plans. Lion was busy beating people up, but it seemed nobody had any useful information. At that moment, the protagonist appeared, called out to her, and told her to stop causing chaos, saying they should leave first and sort everything out later. But she was crouching on the ground, apologizing for failing to follow him properly. He said it was nothing, but she insisted that his flawless infiltration of enemy territory and his skill at gathering information had moved her deeply. She swore then and there that she would follow him forever. Diane was confused and couldn't understand why. This weirdo was suddenly saying all this in the middle of a mission. The only way to make her stand up again was for him to pound his chest and declare that he would never betray her loyalty. Then he said it was time for them to leave, because the mortal knights had an investigation to conduct. Please don't bring those lunatics here. They would end up slaughtering everyone. 3 days later, he was at the castle wondering why finding a sorcerer in that region was so difficult. Of nearly 100 in the Empire, 99 were in the south while they were stuck in the north. He could only hope Cruel hadn't already solved everything. Right then, remember, entered and said they had managed to find someone who could remove the curse. Or rather, they had found a place where they might locate someone within a day. The scene shifted to him, standing on a mountain, overlooking the city where some sorcerers supposedly lived. Lion told him to rest because they had rushed all the way there, but DM insisted they needed to find someone quickly before that person arrived. And of course, Cruel was already walking toward them, making DM wonder how that bastard had appeared yet again. Suddenly a rock came flying from nowhere and struck the protagonist in the head. When he looked to the side, Cruel was naturally already standing in front of him, and it turned out one of the villagers had thrown it. Una declared that disaster had arrived and said they should kill him. They had to drive the boy out of the village immediately. Leon immediately demanded to know how she dared speak to her lord that way. Diane wasn't pleased either and asked what this nonsense about a disaster was supposed to mean. The woman really shouldn't have thrown that stone, because he was now slipping into his cursed state, saying he believed he was nothing more than a simple sinner. But then he calmed himself, thinking the woman must have lost her mind. At that moment, however, someone told the sorceress to calm down. That's when he realized she was the person he'd been searching for. But suddenly she grabbed his arms and told him he must not hate anything. He needed to understand that he couldn't hate anyone or anything in that place, or a terrible disaster would occur. He understood nothing and pulled his hand away, asking why she was getting so close to him. Right then, another woman placed a hand on his shoulder and asked her grandmother to calm down. Finally, a woman appeared. Hopefully, she wasn't another fake. The old woman kept warning her to beware of the disaster, but her granddaughter said it was fine and nothing would happen. You couldn't judge someone without even knowing who they were. Then someone said they had been waiting for him. She introduced herself as Ran and apologized to our boy. He said it was fine, and she immediately asked whether he had come looking for a sorcerer. He had no idea how she knew, but she explained that it was simple for a sorceress like her. The moment he decided to do it, they already knew he was coming. Was it connected to the Church of Salvation? My God, perhaps the spells truly worked, or maybe she worked for that man too, since everyone seemed tangled up in this. DM was now worried that if he refused this woman's help, that shady Cruel would get involved with her instead. So he immediately grabbed her hand and thanked her for anything she could do to help him. Meanwhile, Cruel watched them leave, thinking he didn't care how he obtained a sorcerer. Even if the Duke had told him to prove his worth, he knew that man wanted him to win above all else. Sooner or later he would find a sorcerer too. He wanted to speak with the old woman, but before he could say anything, the strange woman appeared and suddenly embraced him, saying she had seen him there as well. Cruel didn't understand, but she told him she knew he had suffered greatly and didn't need to worry. Nobody there hated him. She knew there was no one left in the world who loved him, but he had to be careful, because those who lived without love had short lives. That was why he had to stay alive and win, to win the contest of who could outlive the other. Even if surviving meant he would cause the apocalypse, if he died, the apocalypse would never happen. If he ever felt he was about to die, or would rather die, he had to make sure he killed that boy first. Honestly, it felt as though the villagers had read the story themselves. They seemed to know everything. At that moment he raised his sword to her neck, telling her he knew how to care for himself, and warning her not to approach him. All the while he thought that he had decided long ago not to die before Diane. As for our boy, he asked Ran whether she could also see the future. She said yes and claimed she could see his future at that very moment. He didn't quite understand how they knew he would arrive, but she explained that it wasn't exactly the future. She simply knew a certain boy with certain intentions would eventually come to that village. While the two of them spoke, a nearby man watched them and wondered who they were. Ran explained that she had to be careful when discussing someone's future, but she could guarantee that the hatred inside him was like a forest fire. It began small, but would eventually grow enormous and consume everything in its path. And that boy was volatile enough to eventually cause all of it. It couldn't be that boy from the village. The one introducing himself now as Dan, asking to accompany Dion. He said that if Dion was truly going to face this disaster, he would need Dan's help in the future. Dan then told them about the day he discovered his destiny. Suddenly the woman was thrown against the wall, and everyone began asking whether she was truly a sorceress. The boy stood there confused, unable to understand what was happening, while the woman said he truly was a traitor destined to serve that disaster. His grandmother had predicted that he would help someone who was cursed, and from that day onward everyone in the village began to hate him, calling him disgusting. Dan couldn't understand what they were talking about. Ren was the only person who told everyone to stop, and that was the sole reason he survived. What he couldn't understand was how people who had once been his friends and neighbors had suddenly turned against him. So he's decided that if everyone would hate him because of this, then when the so-called disaster appeared, he would embrace it. After waiting for a long time, that person finally appeared. The moment he saw him, he knew he had found the disaster. Do I actually understand where this is going? Not exactly, but I suppose we'll find out soon enough, because the protagonist was already back home, and Dan was there with him. Lane explained that this was someone he had brought from the village. Dan said he hadn't received much education and wasn't an exceptional fighter, but he would never disappoint his master. The protagonist wondered whether he should simply send the man away, but ultimately said they would discuss it later. For now, another mission took priority. He explained that everything was ready, the knights needed to assemble, and it was time to move. Dan asked whether he could accompany them, but the boy said no. For now, it was better for him to remain at the mansion. Milo frowned and said fine, but he clearly wasn't pleased. The protagonist kept wondering why this suspicious man wanted so desperately to follow him. Since he didn't know Dan's intentions, he found it extremely suspicious. So why bring him along at all? Oh, right, because that girl who saw the future must have pointed him out. Later that night, at the Church of Salvation, a fire had already started, and our boy's army entered amid the flames. He had warned them beforehand. The plan was to burn everything and use the chaos as an opportunity to infiltrate. He gave the order to kill anyone suspicious. See? Even outside his cursed state, the protagonist isn't exactly kind-hearted. He kills without hesitation. Actually, no, he showed some restraint. He told them not to use the drug that made them lose control and not to kill any believers. The knights thought it would be easier to cut everyone down, while others whispered that this was strange. The captain was normally brutal, yet now he was acting soft. But then Ran appeared and said she had requested it. There was no need to spill so much blood yet. The soldiers grew even more curious and asked when that moment would come. She said they would find out soon, and that was enough to excite them. They told her she could count on them. Inside the church, everything was being destroyed. People were fleeing, and anyone who tried to defend it lay dead on the floor. And of course, as always, everyone recognized the white uniforms. Little Thea grabbed one of the soldiers and demanded to know why. They were doing this, begging them to leave. She knew they had come to destroy the place and kill her too. She pleaded with them to go elsewhere, because this was the only home she had. But the knight was already drawing his sword, saying they needed to make an example of her. Paul, the boy from the slums, shouted for her to get away from him. The soldier swung, but suddenly his sword fell to the floor. I thought someone had stopped him, but no, he had come to his senses. Without the drugs, they couldn't behave like complete lunatics. In the end, he knew this place was those people's last hope, and they would rather die than watch it collapse. But outside, those who escaped knew the person responsible was the Emperor's sword, Dion Hart. They swore never to forgive the Emperor for taking away their paradise. Inside the prayer room, Ran examined the crystal and said the special energy within it was unusual. It was intended for communication and spatial distortion. Then suddenly a magic circle appeared. She leaped back in shock, realizing it wasn't merely a spell, but powerful magic disguised as one. That was because magic was supposed to be usable only by demons. Dion immediately pointed out that this was impossible because they were in human territory. But Ran said she had suspected it from the start, and was certain it could only be activated with magic. That made Dion wonder whether the Demon King knew about it. She asked for more time, saying she would study the structure and perhaps eventually open it. Protagonist doubted a sorceress could decipher something so complex. This spell was far beyond ordinary magic. She would need to be exceptionally skilled, which, judging by the fact that she opened it, she clearly was. He had seen the same reaction before from a green-haired woman, so she wasn't normal either. Once the path opened, Dion said it was time to enter, but as soon as the three of them stepped inside, it seemed as though they were still in the same place. Ran explained that it wasn't the same location. There was clearly a magic circle covered in sigils, protecting a door on the other side. At least the door opened, and they emerged into a forest. Lime was confused, and Ran explained that it was probably some kind of spatial connection. The spell above must have linked that door to another location, meaning that the moment they passed through the crystal, they entered a church that was actually somewhere else. Diana asked whether she knew what type of spell it was, but she admitted she had no idea how it truly worked. The problem was that the door could lead to several places, so they had to solve the spell correctly to avoid emerging in the wrong forest. It was confusing, but she said she needed 10 minutes to identify the correct path. Dion merely hoped he wouldn't encounter Cruel again while pacing around, wondering whether there was anything he could do. Lee noticed that he seemed restless, and suddenly produced a ladder, telling him to rest there. But strangely enough, that was when she realized he had vanished. She began calling his name, while the protagonist found himself standing face to face with Cruel in a corridor. Meanwhile, outside, the entire church was engulfed in flames. Salen, sitting outside, noticed civilians being evacuated. and knew it wouldn't be long before they discovered who was behind everything. To her, this was a poor strategy. If it were her decision, she would seal everyone inside and kill them all. But now that Dion was involved, the priority was moving the evidence far away. The boy needed to discover who was truly behind everything to destroy the organization, and she was determined to ensure he never got what he wanted. Strangely, she was carrying documents away while Cruel stood nearby with a torch, preparing to burn the others. As soon as Dion remarked that they always met at the worst possible times, Cruel dropped the torch. Naturally, everything caught fire. The protagonist demanded to know what he was doing, and tried to stop him, but his brother grabbed his wrist. He asked Cruel whether he was an idiot, pointing out that he had the same mission and that the room contained evidence. The problem was that DM was currently in his calmer state and lacked the ruthlessness to simply cut his brother down. Instead, Cruel shoved him into his arms, practically laying him down, and walked away. The furious protagonist wanted to lose control completely and tear him apart. As he struck his own chest in frustration, he wondered who could be behind the entire church. Few people in the Empire were capable of orchestrating something so enormous. Then he asked himself who the most powerful royal was, the one represented by the purple crest, and the same person Cruel served. Obviously, it was that damned Staveluster. His expression changed instantly. As he realized those bastards had been playing him, he drove his elbow into Cruel's face, but Cruel barely reacted. Instead, he threw the boy into Lion's arms, and she immediately asked whether he was all right. The protagonist burned with rage, but Cruel merely warned that if he wanted to remain alive, he had better say nothing about what he saw that day. Now our boy was lying in bed wrapped in bandages. He kept thinking about the document Cruel had hidden inside his shirt. Now that he knew Staveluster was behind everything, he realized he had never had a real chance of winning from the beginning. That was when Lane entered the room and told him Ran had already left. The protagonist felt somewhat discouraged, but in his memory, Remember entered immediately afterward and said, "We had a visitor. This boy's life never pauses for even a second." The man greeted Count Dion Hart and said he had come to deliver a message from the Emperor. Unfortunately, since Dion had won, he would now have to accept his punishment. The next chapter began with Eduardo waking in bed with a start. Ever since ascending to the throne, he had never been able to sleep peacefully. Everyone he had killed came to torment him at night, and worst of all, even after waking, those souls continued staring at him, saying they hated him, and asking why he alone remained alive after doing that to everyone. As he clawed at his neck in torment, Elpidus entered and called out to his uncle, saying Dion Hart and Cruel had arrived. He asked whether his uncle was all right, because he looked so pale, guessing it must have been another nightmare, but the Emperor snapped at him to leave. Elpidus noticed, however, that he wasn't looking directly at him. His eyes were fixed on something beside him. That was strange. He asked whether his uncle was hallucinating. Eduardo replied that it didn't interfere with his daily life. Elpidus wanted to summon a doctor, but the Emperor told him to relax. It was merely stress from preparing for war, and he had no intention of getting rid of it. In fact, although nobody needed to know, he actually enjoyed seeing those visions. He told the boy not to worry because it wasn't a serious problem. Strangely, Elpidus asked how long his uncle intended to carry this guilt. After all, he had already compensated every victim's family, and cared enough to remember every one of their names. God, did the Emperor pull an Itachi? Did he kill everyone because it was necessary? The Emperor said that ultimately, none of it was normal. Those people would still be alive if not for him. He added that the 8-year war had been his decision, so the blood of every ally and enemy was on his hands. That was a burden he would carry for as long as he remained Emperor. He didn't care, because he had far too much to accomplish to let it defeat him. The scene shifted back to our protagonist staring at Cruel, who as always stared directly back. The two glared at each other with pure hatred until the Emperor appeared and welcomed them. They bowed respectfully, but the protagonist found something strange. The Emperor seemed irritated, despite the mission having been completed. Eduardo told them to raise their heads and said he had heard they had accomplished everything, but also heard Count Dion Hart had been far too merciful. Why had he spared so many people directly involved? On the other hand, he was also the only one who mobilized troops to capture people. Even so, Cruel ultimately returned with the evidence revealing who was behind everything. Both had done excellent work, but Cruel would receive the wish because his contribution was crucial. The protagonist already knew this, and Cruel offered his thanks. The Emperor told him to state his request, and he immediately asked for our boy's county, saying he knew Diane currently held it as an honorary possession. "I swear this brother is pulling an Itachi." The Emperor remarked that it was surprising, but asked whether DM would agree to it. Naturally, the protagonist desperately wanted to refuse. He would rather die than hand it over. Instead, he said that honestly, it had only become another responsibility, If someone could remove it from his hands, that would be perfect. The emperor said that was fine, but someone governing such a place needed a title. The Heart House to which Diem belonged already existed, so Cruel couldn't receive the same title. He would need either a new surname or a new title. Which would he prefer? Apparently, Cruel had lost his title within the Hart family when our boy took control of everything. The emperor even offered to let him change his name and remove Hart from the end, but Cruel wanted to keep it as a reminder of his vengeance. His plan was to destroy the family with his own hands. So that was the issue. There couldn't be two honorary counts in the same family. The protagonist, however, thought this would actually be the best outcome for him. Cruel said he had no interest in changing his surname, nor did he care about inheriting anything from the Hart House. Diem found that strange because, unlike being an honorary noble, carrying the Hart name meant bearing a long history. At that moment, they were the only two descendants remaining. The position of true family head remained vacant. Diem initially thought it belonged to him, but then remembered he was only honorary. He wondered whether Cruel refused because he wanted the family bloodline to end. But that made no sense either, since Cruel didn't want to change his surname. The emperor replied that he had made the same choice himself. They truly were like brothers. The emperor then suggested giving the region to Duke Luster instead. That way, Cruel would gain a title but still govern it, since the Duke would leave him in charge. Cruel accepted, and the emperor dismissed him, but told Diane to remain because they had matters to discuss. The protagonist praised his own instincts, knowing another burden was about to fall upon him. With only the two of them remaining, the atmosphere grew heavy. Diane thought he was about to be punished, while the emperor noticed how tense he seemed, perhaps because he had just lost the territory. He wished the boy would speak more openly instead of keeping everything inside. Then the emperor revealed that another war would begin soon. The Church of Salvation had been destroyed at the perfect moment, and now it was time to deal with the kingdom of Arian, which had long been a thorn in their side. Diane asked whether he truly intended to wage war against them, and the emperor said this was merely the first step. But even Diane's calmer personality had no desire for another war. He was already exhausted after spending 8 years in the last one. Still, the emperor said Diane would be assigned to handle the demon kingdom. The emperor wasn't going to remain idle while conquering the entire continent, so Diane's mission was to remain beside that man and ensure he didn't interfere in the war. That was better than charging into battle and bathing in blood every day. The emperor thanked him, touched the mark, and told him that the next time they met, it had better be gone. Diane merely said he would try, while wondering why the man wanted the mark removed when he still refused to let him retire. At least he would return to the demons, where those two seemed to genuinely like him, unlike the strange Alicia. The scene shifted to Cruel, who informed Stave Luster that he had received Hart County as his reward. The Duke immediately recalled that the last time he spoke with Dion, the boy had mentioned wanting to return the territory. Now he wanted to know whether Cruel had requested it because of his brother. Cruel answered no, saying he simply had few other desires. Stave didn't appear entirely convinced. He apologized, saying Cruel might be stressed about the meeting he was about to attend. Cruel dismissed the concern and said everything was fine. After all, he was responsible for the reward he had chosen. Stave congratulated him on all his hard work, but asked whether there was anything else he needed to know. Cruel said no, concealing the fact that the protagonist had discovered the full truth, that Stave was behind everything. Although they had tried to keep the boy uninvolved, Dion had uncovered it anyway. The problem now was that things would become complicated if Stave ever discovered Cruel had allowed Dion to learn the truth. As the man left the room, he told Cruel to hurry or they would be late. Cruel remained behind, thinking he had to ensure Stave never learned that Dion knew everything. Yet he continued staring at our boy's shadow. Strangely, he behaved that way because he feared Stave would kill Dion. I thought Diane himself was supposed to be the danger. Outside, Stave praised Salen for her work with the church. She thanked him and told him not to worry. They still had many believers, and soon they would achieve what he desired. That was when the true goal of those bastards became clear. In truth, it was fairly simple. While distributing bread and water, she would casually mention that their sponsor was the Duke of Leicester. That way he began to appear like a messiah saving the poor, while more and more people grew to despise the emperor. The plan was for every church follower to see the emperor as the person who abandoned them, while the Duke was portrayed as everyone's savior. To be fair, the emperor wasn't even trying to protect his reputation, so the plan was practically effortless. Salen said she would continue working hard. Then the scene shifted to a meeting where everyone wanted to know why they had been summoned so suddenly. Watching them argue, Stave thought they were all fools. They should have known that if everyone had been called together, it could only concern one thing, the greatest strength of the current emperor. Another war was approaching, so yes, the emperor himself had summoned them. I thought it might be a secret gathering, but no, it was an official summons from him. The moment he entered, everyone stood and saluted, proclaiming glory to the empire. He ordered them to sit and said he knew they were busy, so he would get straight to the point. From that day onward, they would be at war. Naturally, the nobles panicked, saying only 2 years had passed since they returned from an 8-year war. He told them that war had ended, only because nobody dared challenge their authority anymore. Now it seemed their enemies had forgotten their place in just 2 years. One advisor agreed that Arian had been disrespectful, but argued they couldn't begin another war over that alone. There had to be other ways to resolve it. The emperor, however, said it wasn't only Arian. Others were also failing to take their strength seriously. Elsewhere, men wearing turbans discussed Count Dion Hart and said he had been injured. The so-called vampire count might be unable to fight. A man in a blue turban declared that if the demon was wounded, it was time to bring down the empire. Hard times created heroes, and after an endless 8-year war, only 3 had survived. Naturally, the most famous was the protagonist. The emperor remarked that the boy's mere existence was enough to crush enemy morale, but Dion Hart's name wasn't the empire's only strength. It was time to remind the continent of that. From the beginning, their goal had been to dominate the entire region, and now it was time to resume that plan. The nobles hesitated, saying it was still too soon. They still had to deal with the revolutionary army, and withdrawing troops from the capital would be far too dangerous. The emperor told them that was precisely why they had been summoned. He was seeking a solution to that problem when they tried to argue. He slammed down his cup and reminded them that they were forgetting something. He was the empire, and he decided what happened. Any refusal from that moment onward would be treated as a direct insult against him. The entire room instantly fell silent. He then declared the war confirmed and ordered them to present a genuine solution for the revolutionary army at the next meeting. Easy for him, right? Just declare war and dump the entire problem on everyone else. I'd oppose that mess too. The nobles left, muttering that it had only been a matter of time. That war addict was bound to do something like this eventually. The emperor then summoned Duke Luster and pointed out that the person running the Church of Salvation had frequently met with him. The Duke apologized, saying it was his fault for failing to control his people. But then the emperor placed a sword against his throat and asked whether he truly thought him an idiot. This was the same emperor who had already killed 8 brothers, yet the Duke apparently believed he was merciful. Luster quickly said no, but the emperor continued, saying he had heard something interesting about himself being a sinner, and the great Duke Luster representing salvation. The Duke tried to dismiss it, saying it must be the rambling of mad, ignorant people. The emperor nodded, agreeing that he was far more of a disaster than merely a sinner. At that, Luster told him to stop and insisted His Majesty couldn't kill him. Eduardo replied that perhaps he'd forgotten he was the final duke remaining in the region. Luster said that even so, he knew the emperor couldn't kill him, because if another noble died by his blade, the others would refuse to support the new war. The emperor laughed, withdrew his sword, and said those people who called him a sinner were mistaken. Meanwhile, Luster was already hurrying through the hallway, thinking that if he wanted to strip the emperor of power, he first had to eliminate the person protecting him. It was time to act. Then we cut to the protagonist speaking with Elphidus, who asks whether he's heading to the demon kingdom. Dion doesn't even know himself, so how the hell does Elphidus know? Elphidus tells him not to be so tense. He speaks with the emperor every day, so naturally he knows most of the secrets. Then he mentions that Dion must also know the emperor is eager to begin the next war. The order is clear. If the Demon King launches a war against them, Dion must return immediately to help defend the empire. That's the final rule, no matter what happens. Dion, as cold as ever, says he'll remember it. Elphidus stands and thanks him for his hard work. Damn, this man is trying to order our boy around. He didn't even use his sister to soften him up this time. Alone in the corridor, Elphidus feels uneasy. Dion isn't merely absurdly powerful in the human world, but also serves as one of the demon commanders. He doesn't know what the emperor is planning, but he knows he must remember that Diane could betray them at any moment. That's why he tries to maintain a friendly relationship, though his personality makes that anything but easy. Then the most honest girl in the entire story asks how his meeting with Diane went. He tells her it was nothing important and she didn't need to attend. Instead, she should focus on becoming crown princess. She complains that it's boring and she doesn't want to, but he tells her to wake up. The second in line to the throne, she has responsibilities. Alicia says he looks overly anxious and stressed, probably because of all the talk about another war and the revolutionary army. Suddenly, she grabs his hand and drags him away for tea, saying he needs to relax occasionally. That's when Elphidus accidentally reveals that their uncle has been hallucinating, seeing visions of the people he killed, who still torment him. Strangely, Elpidus admits that, even if it's wrong, Eduardo is precious to him. He wouldn't mind opposing the entire world for that man. He says no doctor can identify the illness, and she replies that it's obvious, it's guilt. Amid the flames, the Emperor turns and declares that he'll take responsibility. Right then, Elpidus says Aletia must understand they have no time. The moment he learned about the hallucinations, he began preparing to assume the Emperor's role, and those preparations are nearly finished. He'll do his best in the meantime, while she should focus on her studies. Damn. So he basically just said he wants to protect the Emperor, yet it looks like he's also preparing to replace him. He says that when they were saved, they were still young, and being young in that palace was practically a sin, probably because everyone else had been slaughtered. Meanwhile, Diane is at home wondering how much the prince knows, and what the Emperor truly intended by having that boy deliver the message. Danny, whose reason for remaining in this story is honestly unclear, stands beside him and asks why the boy looks so stressed after meeting the Emperor. The protagonist asks whether he has something to say, since he's been standing there the entire time. Danny says yes, he wants to begin earning money, not because of greed or anything like that, and he's even willing to give all the profits to the protagonist. Diane steps closer and says that from the moment they met, he has wondered about Danny's intentions. Nobody follows a stranger without a reason. And now he's suddenly talking about earning money only to give it all away. Either he's trying to create false trust, or he genuinely wants to serve him. But Diane doesn't particularly care either way. He merely hands Danny a sheet of paper and tells him to follow its instructions, and eventually he'll earn money. Whatever he's trying to accomplish, he had better not interfere. Alright then, it looks like our boy is already moving again, heading back toward the demon realm. But the entire troop appears, insisting he can't simply leave without saying goodbye. Remember apologizes, saying he tried to prevent it, but word spread. Still, Devon pulls up his hood, throws it back, and rides away on horseback, waving farewell to everyone. One of them attempts to follow, but Remember yanks him off course. They all stumble over one another, collapse, and are left behind. Leanne apologizes for allowing him to escape, while everyone else prays that he somehow survives again. As always, however, Remember notices someone from the Revolutionary Army lurking nearby. And look at that, he's smiling. Damn, I'm telling you, is this man controlling everything? What a cursed life our boy has. He can't trust a single person in this place. At least people in the demon realm seem more straightforward. Now he's returning there, only to walk directly into an ambush by those bastards, who will obviously all be cut down and tortured. The next chapter begins at the Revolutionary Army's base. One of them asks why they plan to act only after the Emperor has conquered half the continent. Stave answers that this is the plan, but the Revolutionary Army's captain, a man named Daniel, says he needs to understand why. Stave explains that the war must reach its peak. When the Emperor can no longer end it and only continues prolonging it, that will be the moment they strike. By then, he will have to divide his forces across countless fronts, including the Imperial Palace, leaving every defense spread thin. Daniel says he understands. It's obvious, right? When defenses are weak, killing everyone becomes easier. Stave praises his sharp conclusion and calls him a genius. That's when someone bursts into the room, announcing that Dion Hart has suddenly departed. Daniel celebrates, and Stave says it's an enormous opportunity. Nobody ever knows what to expect from that madman. The captain thanks Stave for his support and says he'll assign someone to monitor Dion's movements. He immediately leaves to take care of it, while Stave remains seated smiling. It's painfully obvious that any soldier sent to pursue Dion Hart will simply end up dead. And yes, that's exactly what happened. The first one was already killed, not by our boy, but by another squad guarding him. Then that squad was wiped out too. Apparently they were following His Majesty's orders, but even they failed to survive. Now Cruel is following the people who are following the people who are following our protagonist, meaning Stave and the Revolutionary Army are also working against each other without realizing it. Stave's plan is to cut off the Emperor's information about Diane. That way, the Emperor will become more anxious and perhaps make poor decisions during the war. On the other side, Cruel's mission is to discover where his brother is going. Truly thought they already knew. Our boy was friendly with the demons, but apparently they don't. The scene then shifts to the abandoned church, where Thea is crying outside. Paul blames himself, saying he never should have brought her to this so-called place of salvation. Although they were starving, they should have been more careful, especially since all it did was give them false hope that was later torn away. He tells her he's going to join the Revolutionary Army. He wants revenge against the Emperor who stole all the happiness they had. He reaches out his hand, asks whether she wants to join him, but unlike last time when she agreed, she now remains seated in silence. He says fine, then he'll do it alone if she wants to remain there, abandoned. He looks back and remembers. You can make friends, but you can never become too close. He should have followed that rule, because then he wouldn't have grown so attached to Thea. Now he's crying, saying it's too late, and he can't simply abandon her. Meanwhile, we're taken to the most peaceful place in the entire story, the Demon King's castle. The one girl who loves him sincerely, Lil Nell, misses him and wonders when the commander will return. Someone beside her asks how much longer they plan to remain there waiting. But then Lil Nell suddenly flies away on her broom, saying she senses a strange presence approaching. She heads toward the gate and lights up when she sees him arriving, fixing him with that stare. She bursts in front of him, full of excitement, saying she missed him and asking how the mission went. He merely lets out a sigh, but inside he's startled by her appearing from nowhere. He says it was exhausting, but he dealt with some strange religious matter and several other things. Lil Nell doesn't even know what religion means. He explains that it's when a group of people follows another person, much like they follow the Demon King with all their hearts. She says that's foolish. Nobody should blindly follow someone like that. Besides, they would be better off following Dion instead. Just like with the Demon Church, he asks what she's talking about. She dismisses it and asks whether he plans to speak with the Demon King, who is currently in the Central Garden. And judging by things, some people might genuinely worship Dean. Naturally, that makes sense. The demon realm is full of lunatics, but at least their devotion feels sincere. In the middle of the garden, a meeting is taking place with the Mermaid Queen, the Fairy King, the Vampire Queen, and the Dwarf King. They all already know the Emperor is preparing to wage war against the Aryan Empire. This part of the continent, known as the Abyss, is home not only to demons, but also to these other races. The Demon King comments that he never realized they were so interested in humans. The Fairy King replies that they obviously need to be cautious. Once the Empire conquers the rest of the continent, their lands will become the next target. Since humans and demons are constantly at war, he doesn't expect the other races to remain untouched by the conflict. The king replies that he's quite bold to say such a thing, but the timing couldn't be better, because his informant from the human realm has just arrived, Captain Demon Arut. Only this kid, right? One moment he's wandering around with the Emperor, the next he's speaking with the Demon King. He's practically everywhere in the world. The Demon King is already excited and asks whether he had a pleasant journey. He marks the spot on the boy's chest and says they have plenty to discuss. Before the boy can say a word, he asks whether it's true that the Emperor intends to conquer the rest of the continent. Diane is about to answer yes when the elf suddenly interrupts, saying he has heard about this so-called informant. But honestly, would anyone at that table trust a human? It's suspicious how readily everyone trusts him. But we know the Demon King always has another card up his sleeve. He assures them there is no need to worry. As long as he's present, everyone can trust Diane. But Diane realizes the truth. If he ever betrays them, everyone in that room will immediately target him. The king asks what orders he received from the Emperor. Diane hesitates briefly about revealing them in front of everyone. But because the king asked, he answers. The Emperor's order was simple. The moment the Demon King interfered in the war, Diane had to obstruct him. If the Demon King fully entered the conflict, Diane was to return to the humans and help defend them. Our protagonist reveals everything directly, without hiding anything, or playing psychological games. Because of that honesty, nobody suspects him. The Demon King says he had already expected as much. It was the obvious move. Then Diem adds that he discovered magic in the human realm. He had been investigating a religious group called the Church of Salvation, and one of the seals they used contained strange magic. The Demon King thanks him and tells him to rest for the time being. But Diem realizes this should have been the sort of news that shocked the Demon King. Instead, he appears neither curious nor angry, which is strange. At that moment, the doctor appears beside him, startling him. Diem coughs up blood as usual, and the doctor immediately says he'll take care of him, then leads him away. The Demon King, however, continues staring. Meanwhile, the Elf King asks why he isn't investigating. Which demon was bold enough to use magic in the human realm without his knowledge? Then he openly accuses the Demon King of ordering it himself, but the Demon King tells him to shut his mouth and watch his words. The blonde elf slams the table and warns him to be careful, saying his race is sensitive to changes in the world. He can sense that a hero will soon be sent, someone unlike anyone before and a threat to the entire region. But the Demon King simply says he isn't afraid. When the time comes to face this hero, he'll handle it. Besides, he's been bored, and after so much peace, it's time for something interesting to happen. The Elf King says fine, since it's the Demon King's chest that may end up pierced by a sword. With that, all four rulers begin leaving, while the beautiful Vampire Queen slips away without saying a word. They all hesitate, realizing they can't rely on the Demon King and considering a private discussion among themselves. Suddenly, the Demon King asks why. They are showing him no respect. He won't tolerate such insolence from a runaway Elf King. Everyone there nearly collapses, struggling to breathe, but then he says he'll overlook it, because they're merely a group of children. This time he'll permit them to leave. The Elf King had better watch his thoughts. Meanwhile, the protagonist walks down the corridor. The doctor wants to assist him, but DM tells him to stop bothering him. The doctor remembers that, ever since the boy arrived, he has always behaved this way. He's constantly coughing up blood. Demon King is always ordering everyone to help him, yet the boy never accepts proper treatment. Somehow, the healer always fails in his duty to treat the after effects of the battle with the hero, but Dion tells him not to worry because he won't die. The healer did nothing wrong, so he can return to his other responsibilities. Strangely enough, because Dion always refuses treatment, Ben swore that he would eventually find a cure for his condition. Once again, he asks the boy to allow him to perform an examination. The protagonist flinches as he approaches, but Ben shows him a magic stone that combines his blood with the Demon King's. He explains that if the boy feels anything, he only needs to say so. The stone will accelerate his blood flow and help him recover much faster. Unfortunately, it only works while he's inside the demon realm and near the king's power. The protagonist says it isn't necessary, but then he runs into Ed. I'm telling you, this kid never gets a moment of peace. Ed examines him from every angle, saying he's going to scold Ben for failing to take proper care of him. That's when Heen also appears, saying he wants to speak with the boy privately. Fortunately, Ed intervenes and pulls him back, just telling him to let the commander rest. What the hell? He literally slams the feminine-looking boy against the wall, telling him not to speak so casually to the commander. The poor man apologizes, saying he had already met Dion once and even shown him the garden. Now he has brought a small gift, this cute and energetic plant. Naturally, Ed flatly says there's no chance the commander wants that monstrosity. Dion merely asks him to show it, so Ed reluctantly agrees and sends Heen away. That's when we see DM a little earlier, telling Ed not to kill him because he had done nothing wrong. Because of that, Ed reluctantly accepted, took the plant, and went to deliver it to the boy. Now DM is lying in bed, staring at this creepy creature, which screams strangely and hums a little tune directly in front of him. But the creature is terrifying, and he jumps backward, saying the damned thing is going to kill him. As he retreats, a knife embeds itself in the wall beside his head, and he wonders whether the plant attacked him too. But then someone enters, saying he never disappoints. It's incredible that he sensed the dagger's presence. I'm telling you, the demon realm suits this kid far better. This woman is Delania, commander of the 2nd Division. Acting slyly, she covers her mouth and asks how he dodged an attack thrown by a specialist in infiltration, invisibility, and assassination. Diane is merely thinking that he wasn't even startled. He was more concerned about the strange little plant than about her. She continues pressing him, asking how he detected her at all when the attack was perfect. Then she asks whether he sensed her hostility toward him. But naturally, she would never possess that much courage, because she knows he could snap and kill her at any moment. She tells him to relax, and says she brought him a pile of gifts. Apparently, it's a huge collection of clothes. She makes him try every outfit on right there. Don't ask me why. Suddenly, a masked man barges in, apologizing and saying he had knocked, but nobody answered. He says he heard Dean had returned and came to pay his respects. Then he foolishly strikes his sword against the door and collapses onto the floor. Immediately afterward, another green-haired person appears. 9, assistant to the 8th commander, comes to help him. The protagonist sits there completely lost, wondering what the hell is happening inside his room, while Delania waves goodbye and starts leaving. But she stops at the door and tells Commander Hell that she heard some idiot in the first city had been spreading rumors about the commander. Strangely, the commander sinks to the floor. 9 tells her to stop treating him that way. The protagonist just wants these lunatics out of his room as quickly as possible. The 8th commander, a man named Hell, was born from the Demon King's own shadow. Originally, he served as the castle's guardian, but as their territory expanded, he was assigned a secret mission. His duty was to prevent any demon from revealing what the protagonist looked like, whether a demon casually mentioned him, or even during battles with heroes. Hell was responsible for ensuring nobody learned Dean's appearance, or in this case, Demon Arut's. It wasn't a coincidence that nobody in the Empire had known what the commander looked like until now. 9 then speaks with Hell in one of the rooms, saying he's glad Hell once again protected the information. Hell asks whether he can speak with Dion now, and 9 says yes, assuring him the boy will appreciate everything he has done. The protagonist was finally beginning to relax in his room with his little plant, when the man suddenly appeared and stared him down. Dion is startled, and Hell says he only came to pay his respects and report everything that has happened. Because of the shock, the protagonist coughs up blood as usual, and then Ben bursts into the room, asking whether he's feeling alright. The strange Hell is already preparing to take his own life, saying he made the commander suffer, but both men tell him to stop and not even consider it. Dion tells him to return to his usual duties, wondering why Hell is the only demon in the entire kingdom who looks at him so calmly, as though he could kill him easily. Considering the man is literally the Demon King's shadow, he's anything but weak. With that, Ben leaves and Dion is finally alone in the room for a moment. He begins thinking that he now remembers what living in the Demon King's castle is truly like. And now that everything is official, perhaps he should begin acting as a double agent, just as the Emperor wanted. And that was the beginning of the end for the Demon King. Leave a like on this video.